Yes, sir.
Cool. Yeah, so, Big Homie, stood up, Big Tony. So, man, it's about as bad as, Bill Moore's speech as far as the impact that this is gonna have on ufology. This is like a 9/11 moment, really, I'm devastated.
I mean, it's clear that we're not getting disclosure then.
Yeah, man. Alright, you guys wanna go on and start the speech, I guess? Looks like, we might have a small crowd due to the, Doomer space, continuing. So, looks like everybody here probably knows the background on the Bill Moore stuff, and we'll probably get people that would join. Hey, Tom, I sent you a co-host invite. You should be able to, join as co-host, but yeah, you can come up as speaker, of course. Yeah, Tom, there should be like a button to click, that says join as co-host, depending on whether you're on desktop or if you're on mobile. But, if you guys don't have anything to say, I know that all three of us, know, and Steve's knowledgeable too, so he doesn't really need an intro into the Bill Moore speech. I guess, we'll go on and start it, unless you guys have anything that you want to say or talk about beforehand.
Yeah, I feel like people will slowly start coming in. Also, this will be recorded, so this is, hopefully people will play it back, because this is definitely, I gotta say, I think this speech in particular is way more important than anything, Sarfati has to say in the Doom Room, so that's just my opinion, but, hopefully people will see the light.
Do you have anything you want to say before we get started? Alright, let's get to it. Hey, Tom, do you have anything to say before you get started?
Nope.
Before we start the, no?
Go ahead.
That's absolutely the worst introduction I have ever had.
Send me something.
You can't trust the males these days. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and adversaries, associates and colleagues, in short, fellow ufologists. I had really wanted to come here tonight and kick ass. But fortunately for us all, wiser heads have prevailed, and we're going to keep this thing professional. Before I begin, it seems appropriate to first take a few moments to personally thank Mr. Walt Andrus of the MUFON organization and the organizers and hosts of this symposium, whose kind invitation made it possible for me to be here. I'm also appreciative of this excellent time spot, which must mean that those who arrange the schedule must think that I have something to say. I'll try not to disappoint you. I might also add that my talk here tonight is primarily directed at those of you who are members of the UFO community. That's not to suggest that those of you who are here as third parties won't find it interesting. It's just that you might not be able to follow some of the in-house comments I'm going to make. And that's opposed to outhouse comments, which I'll try to avoid, even though some cases they may be appropriate. Having anticipated the faltering star, allow me to introduce myself. I'm aware that you already know my name, and I'm equally certain that many of you are wondering just who is Bill Moore and what's he up to. Added to that, I'm sure, are many other questions. Is this man a government agent? What about his rumored contacts within the intelligence community? Are the MJ-12 documents real? Or are they counterfeit? And if they're counterfeit, did he forge them? And isn't he really in it for the money, after all? The truth about Bill Moore, I'm afraid, is considerably less sensational. Those of you out there that know me well can vouch for it. Those who don't can verify it easily enough. Bill Moore graduated from college in 1965. Between that time and 1979, I spent 14 years as a high school teacher and a concurrent 10 years as a part-time labor relations expert within the structure of the Minnesota Education Association. In both cases, I had an excellent reputation. In 1979, after having successfully published the Philadelphia Experiment with co-author Charles Berlitz, I resigned my teaching position and moved with my family to Arizona in order to take up writing full-time. In 1980, I co-authored a second bestseller, The Roswell Incident, which was the preliminary account of an investigation into an alleged UFO crash in New Mexico in 1947. At that time, the book was skeptically received by the UFO community and mercilessly panned by the debunkers. I stood my ground, broke with Berlitz, weathered the storm of rocks and mud that was thrown in my direction, and ultimately, with continued high-quality research and a careful, skeptical, journalistic approach, managed to persuade many of the initial doubters that there was indeed something to the case. And in so doing, I earned the respect of many of you in the audience. And I expect that my reputation and credibility with respect to the Roswell case is at least partly responsible for my having been invited to speak here tonight. I urge you to keep that in mind. If you're one of those who respects my work on Roswell, then I ask you to consider that I'm trying to carry on the same sort of quality investigation with respect to my current project. It's just that the circumstances are quite different. And I've not been in a position until now to properly inform others about what I've been doing. This, unfortunately, has given rise to considerable controversy, with a number of falsehoods having been spread by others in the UFO community who saw fit to jump to hasty conclusions inappropriately formed without benefit of all the facts. One of the most persistent rumors about me is that I'm a rich man, or that I'm somehow funded by the government to spread disinformation and dissension within the UFO community. Neither could be further from the truth. The real Bill Moore is as poor as a church mouse. I came away from 1983 with virtually nothing. I went through bankruptcy shortly thereafter. I began to rebuild my life. The money I make from writing, royalties, and the sale of mostly UFO-oriented books and publications is all plowed back into living expenses and continuing research. It's a constant scrape to get by, but I believe in what I'm doing. And in order to preserve the freedom necessary to continue, I've had to make sacrifices. I'm definitely not in this business for the money. I live in a rented house. I drive a 1977 car and a 1979 motorcycle. I have no savings accounts, no stocks, no bonds, and I recently dropped my health insurance because I couldn't afford it any longer. I'm not looking for a handout, nor do I expect any sympathy. I simply tell you this because I want it on the record. Those who are spreading rumors that I live in wealth and comfort are invited to come and verify the situation any time they wish. My door is open. Those who allege that I have counterfeited documents and concocted a hoax on the MJ-12 matter had better take the same facts into account. Rest assured, I know myself well enough. If I was trying to perpetrate a hoax, I would have played it for all the cash I could get a long time ago and taken the money and run, as some are doing even now in the UFO community. And as for my being on the government's payroll, I can only say that I wish I was. The government pays well, and it provides excellent benefits. So why should you believe anything Bill Moore has to say? The fact is that I have information that will add to your knowledge of the UFO phenomenon. I will report it to you in as reliable a fashion as I can and in as objective as possible. Those of you who have numbered among my friends and supporters will perhaps find it comforting in light of some of the more outrageous rumors that have been circulating throughout the UFO community recently. Others of you who have chosen to cast aspersions and throw rocks in my directions out of fear that I might uncover something which will upstage your own efforts will undoubtedly take great pains to dissect what I have to say here in an effort to find more reasons to question my integrity. No matter. In the final analysis, I'm not asking you to believe, only to listen. What you do from that point is entirely up to you. 2 years ago at the MUFON Symposium in Washington, D.C., I stood before a similar audience and presented preliminary information on the so-called MJ-12 papers. I also alluded at that time to a series of ongoing contacts between myself and a number of well-placed individuals within the government and the intelligence community. American ufology has been in a turmoil over the MJ-12 matter ever since, with charges and countercharges being thrown back and forth so fast that it's almost impossible to keep up with them. Worse, the rumor mill, fueled by speculation, disinformation, and increasingly gross exaggerations on the part of those who ought to know better, has emerged as a major force which it sometimes seems from this vantage point has all but replaced common sense and sound judgment in some circles. What ought to have been a sane and concerted effort to get at the truth has taken on virtually all the trappings of a three-ring circus. And American ufology, as I see it, now stands at the edge of a severe crisis which has already shaken it to its very core. I have every confidence that ufology will survive. Whether it will emerge from this present state of flux with as much credibility as it had going in, I don't know. I, for one, am somewhat ashamed and embarrassed by the mudslinging that I have witnessed, much of it directed at me, these past 2 years, and by the incessant and increasing rumor mongering which has tantalized us all by its highly sensational nature, and yet in the final analysis has offered us so very little in the way of tangible evidence. I hope what I have to say here tonight will have the positive effect of laying some of it to rest. But speaking in all candor, I certainly won't count on it. Throughout our history, mankind has witnessed many quests, and in every case, those who study history tell us that there was the inevitable clack of narrow-minded fools who, believing that such quests waste time and energy better spent on useful endeavors, did everything they could to discourage the process and discredit the individuals involved. Pardon my observations, but so it is with our present quest for knowledge about UFOs. Whether UFOs are or are not extraterrestrial is really only a part of the picture. In the final analysis, the process of studying this phenomenon and the people involved with it, of assessing the claims and the counterclaims, and of dealing with the question of how we as Earthlings will react to the discovery of a race of extraterrestrial visitors and how they will react to us. All of this and more, when finally looked at in perspective, leads us to the inescapable recognition that in studying the UFO phenomenon, we are at the same time becoming more aware of ourselves as individuals and learning something about the society that we are a part of. The recognition, as noted by my friend Stan Friedman many years ago, that any alien spending 10 minutes looking at planet Earth must come away with the conclusion that we are, in the eyes of that alien, nothing more than a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare, is at once both revealing and powerful. It is through the mirror of UFOs as alien visitors that we ultimately come to look at ourselves and to recognize what and who we really are. Such a process can only prove beneficial to mankind in the long term, regardless of what the true nature of UFOs turns out to be. And those who would stand in its way by attempting to heap derision or ridicule upon the subject do us a grave disservice. Had mankind's greatest inventors, scientists, explorers, builders, painters, musicians, composers, physicians, surgeons, the list goes on. The point is, had these people throughout our history heeded the mindless blusterings and ravings of the skeptics, the scoffers, and the debunkers who were present in each and every case, there would have been no progress, and mankind would still be in the Stone Age. Moreover, in every case where a breakthrough was achieved and progress was made, it is the achiever who is remembered and honored by history, and not the debunker and the skeptic who said it could not be done. The bottom line here is that the UFO phenomenon is a legitimate study by anyone in our free society who chooses to do so. And those who have elected to participate in such a quest should not be held up to derision and ridicule because of it. Those debunkers and UFO bashers who have nothing positive to contribute are advised to go and massage their egos somewhere else. In my opinion, those people have no right whatsoever to dictate to others what is fit for study and what is not, or what they should believe and what they shouldn't. Which brings me to my next point. I've been accumulating information on the UFO phenomenon for more than 25 years. During that time, I have watched ufology trying to grow up, trying to achieve respectability with the public, the news media, and the scientific community. In that process, I am sorry to say it's been my observation that we have been our own worst enemy. No skeptic, no debunker could possibly do what we have done to ourselves, not once, but time and time again. We say we want respectability, yet we have made little effort to construct the foundations necessary to achieve it. Sadly, we have no uniform standards, no professional ethics, no peers, no qualifications, no uniform goals, and few credible spokespersons. Nobody speaks for ufology. Or rather, perhaps more correctly, everybody speaks for ufology, all at the same time, and each with a different voice. Anybody can be a ufologist. All they need to do is tack the title at the end of their name and publish, yes, even self-publish, a book, start a newsletter, or get themselves on television. And should their material be pure, unsubstantiated claptrap or broken crockery, that's cracked pottery for those of you that don't get that one, no matter. There's always some other self-styled ufologist who will come along, see it as the ultimate wisdom of the universe, and endorse it wholeheartedly, thus adding further to the confusion. Is it any wonder we have degenerated into a host of political camps, each one of which throws rocks at as many of the others as possible, while at the same time loudly proclaiming to all who will listen that they are the only true religion? Meanwhile, the debunkers, who are essentially united under a single banner, throw rocks at all of us, and the public, as hapless observer to the entire process, emerges more confused than ever. With that in mind, I would like to take a moment and ask each and every member of this audience to reach down inside yourself and come up with a true answer to a very important and difficult question. What you say publicly has no meaning in this process. It's what you know inside of yourself to be truth that matters. I want you to ask yourself, why are you involved with the UFO phenomenon? Do you truly desire answers? No matter what those answers may be, and no matter how much those answers may be at variance with what you presently believe? Or are you one of those people who thrives on a continuing mystery, whose very position in the field of ufology requires that the mystery of UFOs be perpetuated rather than solved, so that you can continue in your self-styled role of importance? Let's suppose you are the head of an organization devoted to the study of UFOs, and there are several such here, including myself. What happens to your organization, and ultimately to you yourself, if the UFO mystery is suddenly solved? Do you truly want to see that happen? Or is it more palatable and convenient to keep the pot simmering for as long as possible? Only you and you alone know what it is that motivates you. If you're one who's sincerely interested in finding answers, and if you can proceed with an open mind, then maybe I can offer you some inspiration. If, on the other hand, you are one who prefers to inflate your own image through the spreading of unsubstantiated, often alarming, and increasingly sensationalistic disinformation, hearsay, and rumor, then I urge you to reassess your position and channel your energies along more acceptable lines. If you haven't thought about that, I urge you to do so. It's important that we all know where we stand. As for myself, I made my decision a number of years ago as a result of suddenly having found myself face to face with an opportunity to learn more about what our government knows about UFOs. I believed then, and I continue to believe now, that it is possible to uncover answers by searching carefully and competently for them in the right places. Finding those answers and thus ending my so-called career as a ufologist poses no problems at all for me. As a writer, I'm interested in a variety of subjects, many of them non-UFO related. Should I go as far as I feel I can with the UFO question, I have plenty of other fish to fry, many of which are just as interesting and every bit as challenging. The truth, fellow ufologists, is that I have known precisely what I was doing all along. It's just that very few other people knew what I was doing, and it was this lack of information on the part of other researchers that has given rise to so much controversy. Consequently, I harbor no grudge against others who have attacked me, sometimes bitterly, because they disagreed with my methods, or because they mistook my refusal to answer their often legitimate questions as a display of arrogance and contempt. I counseled patience then, and I counsel it now. A rush to judgment is a dangerous and a divisive thing. Those who engage in such practices may sound high-minded and well-informed at first blush, but in the long run, they do nothing to enhance their own stature or credibility, and they certainly contribute nothing to our quest for answers. Consider the strange case of Mr. Smith, Mr. Jones, and the jury. You, the audience, are the jury. Mr. Smith is dead. Mr. Jones is being tried for the murder. The prosecutor stands before you and gives you these facts. When the police arrived in response to a complaint that a fight was in progress, he says, Mr. Smith was found lying dead on the floor of his apartment. The cause of death was strangulation, and the body was still warm. Mr. Jones was found bending over the body with his hands still around the victim's throat. Neighbors and others who knew both men have testified that there was considerable animosity between the two of them, and that on more than one occasion Mr. Jones was heard to threaten Mr. Smith's safety and well-being. Obviously, Jones had gone to see Smith, and a violent argument ensued during which Jones strangled Smith. Unfortunately for Jones, the police arrived before he was able to effect an escape from the scene. You're the jury. Is this sufficient evidence to condemn Mr. Jones for murder? I tried out this scenario during conversations with a number of people over the past few months, and I was amazed at how many people agreed that it is. One of whom was my good friend Walt Andrus, who recently saw fit to publish an outrageously lopsided piece of trash in his newsletter, written by a man I've never met, spoken to, or corresponded with, and who could have easily obtained answers to his questions simply by taking the trouble to ask. A significant minority who listened to my Smith and Jones scenario, however, hesitated before passing judgment. What is Mr. Jones's defense? They wanted to know. And of course, that's really what it's all about. In the case of Smith and Jones, the truth is that it was Smith who invited Jones to his apartment with the intention of quietly doing him in and disposing of the body before anyone was the wiser. Jones, however, turned the tables on Smith and accidentally killed him in the process of self-defense. And so it is in the case of Moore, the government, and MJ-12. Those who have already decided that I'm one of the bad guys in this controversial case have done so on the basis of only half a story. They have rushed to judgment without hearing the defense. Indeed, some of the most vocal of my critics have never once bothered to contact me and ask me if I had a defense. Hasty pudding, as one recent tract put it quite humorously. A tract which, by the way, I did not write, but which I found to be most appropriate. Unfortunately, I can't provide you with the entire case for the defense this evening. The reason is that the defense is still in process of completing its investigation. But I can provide you with a significant part of it, enough so that at least you can begin to understand what I've been doing and where it's all going. For some of you, it may not be what you want to hear, but it's nonetheless true. And it should provide you with a good sense of perspective concerning a lot of other things that have been going on in ufological circles recently. It all began more than 10 years ago with a man named Paul Benowitz. Let me preface my remarks by offering the sincere and candid statement that what I'm going to say is, to the best of my knowledge, entirely true. It is offered without malice or prejudice in any way, and is under no circumstances intended to be libelous or defamatory. I genuinely like Mr. Benowitz, continue to regard him as a friend, and have a great deal of sympathy for the difficulties he's been through. It is not my intention to upset him with these revelations, but rather to add a few facts to a record that's been out of balance for a lot of years. I had moved from Minnesota to Arizona during the late summer of 1979, and as a result had become somewhat closer to Jim and Cora Lorenzen of the old Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, or APRO, in Tucson. Ultimately, they invited me to become a member of the APRO Board of Directors, and I accepted. It was in this capacity that I first became acquainted with the work being done by Paul Benowitz and Dr. Leo Sprinkle regarding an alleged UFO abduction involving a young woman and several others which had occurred sometime earlier. The woman had been hypnotically regressed by Dr. Sprinkle and had provided a strange account of having witnessed a cattle mutilation in process, and of subsequently having been taken by her alien abductors into some sort of craft or facility where these aliens were actively engaged in processing fluids and severed body parts obtained from these cattle. During the course of the hypnosis sessions, which began, as near as I can recall, in August of 1979, Benowitz had become convinced that the aliens had implanted some sort of communication device in the woman's head, and that they were using this device to control her actions. His theory was that they could actually see what she saw and hear what she heard by means of this device. In any case, Benowitz, being a physicist by profession and having a certain amount of electronics equipment at his disposal and the wherewithal to purchase more as needed, set out to determine whether it might be possible to detect the electromagnetic signals he believed these aliens must be using to exercise their control over their alleged victims. and to try to devise a way to shield the victim from the control of the signals. He dubbed his effort Project Beta and communicated to APRO in late 1979 that he believed he had succeeded in detecting signals from UFOs and had begun to make calculations about the sort of electronic and propulsion technology employed by these aliens. It was also at about this time that Paul began to take both moving and still pictures of strange lights maneuvering in the vicinity of the Manzano nuclear weapons storage facility, which is located on the east of Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, and of which Benowitz had a perfect view from his residence. Benowitz was convinced that these lights were UFOs, and that for some reason they were actively interested in both the Manzano complex and the Coyote Canyon test area located directly south of Manzano on the other side of the hills.
All right, guys, that's exactly 30 minutes. I think that's a good spot to stop for our first intermission, I guess you could say. I don't know. So take it away.
Okay, this is Tom Whitmore.
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Can I get a thumbs up if anybody can hear me?
Yeah.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, I can
in
hear
the
you.
chat, maybe? My co-hosts hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can hear you. I have several remarks.
Chat can't hear me?
Ryder, can you hear me?
Well, while he gets that sorted, I guess TLDR so far, ufology is its own worst enemy, right? That's pretty much the first half hour of the speech.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, Thomas, I can hear you.
I had to recycle myself, and I couldn't hear you guys. I'm sorry if I was not talking over you guys intentionally. If that's what was happening, I just couldn't hear you, so I had to back out. But yeah, so first break. That's exactly 30 minutes. I'm sure you guys heard me. So yeah, go on. And thanks everybody for coming to the space. And yeah, that's a great spot. That's kind of yeah. I mean, what's your thoughts, Tom, about what has been said so far? He was kind of brief about things. About kind of the build up. I guess yeah. Can you kind of give some background as to the events that kind of led up to this moment in time? And also, guys, just one last thing before I hand it over to Tom. I put a companion PDF that I made. It's a PDF that you don't have to download it. You can actually view it right there in the archive.org browser, right there on, right there. And the PDF contains a transcript of the speech. It contains a bunch of like background information, on, the Benowitz affair, on Bill Moore, the guy who's given this speech. And it also has a chapter from, my favorite book, the Mirageman book, and a bunch of photos and cool stuff like that. So, check it out. And Tom.
Okay, well, he's going to get into more detail about the background of how things led up to this, but I thought that he started out very arrogant. The first thing he did was he insulted the master of ceremonies, saying that was the worst introduction that he had ever had. And of all the presenters at the symposium that year, Bill Moore was the only one who did not submit his paper in advance, and that's standard procedure. So if he had done that, the master of ceremonies would have had more information, and that's why he said, send me something. Later in his talk, I don't want to spoil it, but he will get to the point where he describes he mentions his findings. And his findings are based on the fact that the government has had deep experience with UFOs and extraterrestrials and has been operating in great secrecy. And based on Moore's investigation, I would think he would know better than to blame the UFO community. How can the UFO community do a good job if it can't get to the information it needs? And then later he insulted Walt Andrus.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely with you. I mean, just so you know, UFO Mean Face is kind of a sympathizer. We've got an enemy right up here in our midst. He kind of likes to make excuses for Bill Moore. I think Bill Moore was a scumbag. I am with you, Tom. I mean, not that you called him a scumbag, but the guy was so arrogant. The guy was, just the ego on him, but I guess that's what made him succeed, got the success that he had, throughout the 80s was because he had that ego that was driving him. But yeah, the guy's an egomaniac.
Don't get me wrong. I think the world of Bill Moore as a researcher. I think he's one of the greatest researchers in UFO history. But I'm just remarking about his arrogant kind of schoolmaster tone in lecturing the audience.
My God, we've got two of them up here, guys. We're surrounded by Bill Moore sympathizers. All right, I guess I'm gonna have to. All right, Steve Long's coming up. Maybe he can be a voice for reason.
Before Steve goes, I just wanted to mention. So, I think it's interesting to note. I guess there were a sequence of events before he went up here to give his speech. He did mention that he was very dismayed about the vitriol hurled at him by the UFO community, and the fact that people seem to, even back then, then it seems like we think it's bad now. It seems the shit slinging was fully in effect back then, and how the UFO community tends to tear itself down. And I don't know if he was generally blaming the community, but like I think he was trying to put a spotlight on the fact that, tearing each other down isn't necessarily the way to go, as well as coming to quick and decisive decisions just for the sake of being the first one to do so, right, doesn't do anybody any good. And there are some people that really they benefit from staying in the mystery, right, despite whatever the facts show, if it's about a certain case or a certain experience or whatever. Some people do want to stay in that nebulous, oh, this is still kind of a mystery thing, versus actually outlining the facts and coming to a certain conclusion based on those facts. So it sounds, and this guy basically canceled himself, right, coming up here. Like, that's it. His career is over. So I think he had to be prepared for that. It sounds almost, and this maybe is why he sounded arrogant or flippant, and I agree, he did come across that way. I think he might have just been done with it. I think he was over it. Not just the community in general, but also like his experience with Benowitz, with Doty, and then also again with the community. Is just, I think he was just, I'm out, I'm done, and I'm gonna say my piece. And I think a lot of that is coming across. So yeah, I can see why he comes off a little combative, I think, in the beginning.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree too. And like at the time, Moore was already taking a lot of flack from people in the community, researchers, skeptical researchers, for a multitude of things, from the MJ-12 documents to his involvement with Benowitz and Doty, which were already well known in the community and was being questioned already. So this speech was really, I think, an attempt for Moore to try and do some revisionism, paint himself the way that he would want to be seen, get some looks in. It wasn't necessarily the end of his career. He was still involved with the topic for like 10 years after this, but he never again achieved the success that he had in the 80s. Like, this guy was at the top of the pyramid. It would be like if Jeremy Corbell came out today and said, I was used, I was deceived by people in the intel community. My research was still good, and my intentions were still good. In these cases, I still stand by, but I have some things that I need to say because it's the right thing to do. And I just think a lot of it has to be looked at in that guise of ego and just somebody trying to save themselves and save what they have left or their influence and just defend themselves. And there's a lot of great stuff that Moore has to say in this speech, a lot of great suggestions, almost none of which were lived by Moore himself, even well after this speech. He notes the information feedback loop that happens in the topic, but then admits that he exploited that loop and is still doing so in this speech right here. So there's just so many different angles to this speech, and it's really it's like the first thing that people should definitely listen to, I think, when they start getting into the topic. So I'm really glad that you're sharing it tonight, even though most of us know about the nuances that are involved with it.
Yeah, I just also want to add that, like, I agree with a lot of what you said, Steve. But even just the manner of discussion, or at least in this speech, it's so much more academically minded than what we hear today. And this was just like the intro, like the build up into it, right? And as far as it being like Corbell, I would argue that Moore is worth 100 Corbells. But I know there's some people out there that would disagree with me. But I tend to agree with Thomas Whitmore. Bill Moore is probably one of the best researchers that this field has had. And there's a reason why Stanton Friedman still, associated with him afterwards, after this speech. So, I mean, that's my opinion, and, you're free to disagree, but, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I only use Jeremy Corbell in the sense of someone who's kind of, up at the top of the pyramid, the top of the topic, well-known and successful, with, a whole career built on cases and access to the inside. I would probably take, some issue with the overall value that Moore brought to topic, but I would definitely agree that he was, much more academic. And even just, that 30-minute opener, which really we could have done without, but he really lays out, where he's going to go in the speech, right in there, attacks at various people, defense of himself, stands by his own research. He's going to have excuses for why he did what he did, and he, was well-intentioned. But yeah, I do agree that he was definitely, he could write really well. He was an academic, and he was a very good researcher. I'll give him that. Yeah.
All right, I guess we'll go on and get started, or we'll get started back with it, and we'll probably go 40 minutes this time. That way we can do, instead of doing another 30-minute, plays, we'll do, we'll do we'll do a 40-minute, then we'll play the rest of it, the last roughly, hour. It'll probably be like 50 minutes will be the last, section. So, we'll go 40 minutes, and, so that'll be 10:25 Eastern. So.
By the way, I do also Also, just want to add, this is definitely the better space going on right now. So if you happen to be in this one and not in the doomer, sarcastic, bullshit one, congratulations. You've leveled up for sure in this field.
And can we also have a moment of silence for Big Tony? Our man Artisan Tony got stood up by Big Homie. It's almost as impactful as this Bill Moore speech. Really, guys, this is like another Bill Moore speech that is happening right now in this moment in time. People are going to be talking about it for decades to come. It's just really a sad moment. So say a prayer, for Big Homie. He's probably MIA. Who knows what happened for him to have to miss this? But, anyways, I'll go on to start back with it. All right.
During this time, the only awareness I had of Benowitz and his work was what I was obtaining through APRO. I still had not met the man, and in fact was only mildly interested in the case. This based largely upon both Jim and Carl Lorenzen's assessment of Benowitz as a dedicated researcher, but unfortunately one who was, as Jim put it, prone to make great leaps of logic on the basis of incomplete data. Both Jim and Carl felt that Benowitz had already decided what he was going to find before he went looking for it. Still, although I didn't come to know about it until a few months later, there apparently was something going on involving UFOs near Manzano, particularly during August, September, and October of 1980. And several agencies of the U.S. government, including the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, seemed more than just casually interested in it. In early September 1980, I was approached by a well-placed individual within the intelligence community who claimed to be directly connected to a high-level government project dealing with UFOs. This individual, who subsequently came to be known as the Falcon, told me that he spoke for a small group of similar individuals who were uncomfortable with the government's continuing cover-up of the truth, and indicated that he and his group would like to help me with my research into the subject in the hope that I might be able to help them find a way to change the prevailing policy and get the facts out without breaking any laws in the process. I knew I was being recruited, but at that point, I had no idea for what. In any case, I was told that if I was interested in cooperating with their group, I would further be contacted by a liaison man, and that future meetings between me and the Falcon would be arranged by this person. The liaison person who subsequently made contact with me was AFOSI agent Richard Doty, a man who has since become quite controversial in his own right, and who many people have mistakenly assumed is the Falcon himself. The story of my contacts with the Falcon, Doty, and subsequently a number of others is something I will have considerably more to say about at a later date. I'm fully aware that such a course of action will undoubtedly prompt the gossip mongers to begin circulating an entirely new array of outrageous and unsubstantiated rumors. So be it. My purpose here is to deal only with that part of the story which is directly connected to the Benowitz affair. To those of you who want to know more after hearing what I had to say tonight, I counsel continued patience. You have my assurance that the rest of the story will ultimately be told as well. But before going back to the Benowitz affair, let me make several points which seem appropriate at this juncture. First of all, on the question of Richard Doty and the Falcon, it's important to note that the name Falcon was invented by my partner Jamie Chandray and I in 1984, strictly as a way of facilitating our talking to each other about this person, particularly on the telephone, without having to use a name. Richard Doty, who continued to be liaison man, was similarly referred to us, or by us, as the Sparrow. Neither Sparrow nor Falcon were aware that we were using these terms in reference to them, nor was anyone else, to the best of my knowledge, prior to about mid-1985. It was in mid-1987, just after we went public with the MJ-12 papers, that at Falcon's suggestion and with the concurrence of Richard Doty, we began dropping subtle hints that Falcon might in fact be Doty. Falcon felt that such a ploy would be useful to him in continuing to protect his identity, while Doty, for his part, said that if anybody asked, he could simply deny it, and that would be that. We agreed. And as many of you are painfully aware, It turned out to be an excellent diversion, particularly with respect to the effect it had following the UFO Cover-Up Live show, which was broadcast nationally in October 1988. In all fairness to Mr. Doty here, I should also like to comment that in my assessment, Rick is much better at following orders and implementing the schemes of others than he is at coming up with ideas of his own. Those of you that have devoted time and energy to constantly badgering this man for more information should be aware that all you are doing is making nuisances of yourself. Rick is not the man you're after. It's the person in the control position that's important here. And as far as I'm aware, no one outside of my project has any idea who that person might be or what his motives are. In any case, it was Falcon who sought me out in September of 1980. And it was Richard Doty, then with AFOSI at Kirtland Air Force Base, who soon came into play as the middleman in that process. Shortly thereafter, it became apparent to me that my supplying information to the government through Doty on the activities of Paul Benowitz, APRO, and to a lesser extent several other individuals was to be a part of this equation. I also discovered that whatever it was that Benowitz was involved with, he was the subject of considerable interest on the part of not one, but several government agencies, and that they were actively trying to defuse him by pumping as much disinformation through him as he could possibly absorb. Being a very small part of that process gave me, I thought, something of an advantage. It became my intention to play that advantage for all the information I could get out of it. Benowitz, for his part, continued to make what, in my opinion, seemed to be increasingly irrational claims, most of which gave every appearance of having been influenced by a heavy blanket of disinformation mixed with a small but significant amount of truth. The problem was always one of keeping a level head and trying to carefully sort the shit from the candy, something which Paul didn't seem to be very good at. But then Paul was by that time very emotionally involved with the affair and rather skeptical of advice from any quarter unless it supported what he had already decided was the truth. From my vantage point, being detached from the mainstream but still close enough to appreciate what was happening, it was somewhat easier to assess the process. I first met Paul in early 1981 and continued contacts with him on a fairly regular basis through mid-1985. Contact since then has been sporadic. My role in the affair was largely that of a freelancer providing information on Paul's then current thinking and activities. I had nothing whatsoever to do with the counterintelligence and the disinformation, although I either knew or was aware of a number of people directly involved with that end of things. Richard Doty was one of these people, although I came to know Doty well enough to gain the impression that he was faithfully carrying out orders which he personally found distasteful. Perhaps it was for this reason that the Falcon had chosen him as liaison person, although I don't really know. Frankly, I don't believe that Doty does either. In my opinion, he was simply a pawn in a much larger game, just as I was. As for Benowitz, by 1981 he was gathering data from a variety of sources and amalgamating it with information being fed to him by a number of government people in whom for some reason he seemed to have an implicit and abiding faith. The story that emerged from this melange of fact, fiction, fantasy, hearsay, hard data, and government disinformation was absolutely incredible. Yet, somehow, Paul believed in it and set out on a one-man crusade to tell the world that malevolent aliens from space were in league with our government to take over the planet. What had begun in 1979 as an effort to learn whether the behavior of a woman who claimed she had been abducted by UFO aliens and was being influenced by some sort of radio remote control had, in the space of less than 3 years, blossomed into a tale which rivaled the wildest science fiction scenario anyone could possibly imagine. Basically, it seemed to me that Paul was his own worst enemy, Instead of withholding judgment until all of the facts were in, Paul insisted on repeatedly going off half-cocked to virtually anyone who would listen. Members of the press, other UFO researchers, U.S. congressmen and senators, people in military command positions, members of the scientific establishment, even the president himself, all were members or subjects of Paul's efforts to reach out and tell the world what he sincerely believed to be happening. He wrote letters and made phone calls by the hundreds. And to those who had neither the time nor the inclination to look behind the words for a better understanding of the facts, Paul, with his professional credentials and technical vocabulary, came off as a rather credible individual, which must have caused quite a rash of headaches among the people in high places who were desperately trying to defuse him. The idea that UFOs had something to do with the phenomenon. Number two, an increasing number of UFO cases wherein the individual or individuals involved claimed to have been abducted by UFO aliens and taken aboard their craft against their will. Public exposure to this phenomenon got a big boost in 1981 with the appearance of Bud Hopkins' bestseller Missing Time, and Paul was particularly interested in these cases. His hypothesis that people were being abducted, implanted with some kind of alien control device, and then being let go again was completely consistent with the thinking of a number of other UFO researchers at the time. Paul's hypothesis, however, had a somewhat more sinister spin than most. Third, his own experiments and research regarding the radio signals he was receiving and the photographs and film footage he was getting of unusual lights. Both of these phenomena seemed largely, though not entirely, connected with goings-on within the Kirtland Air Force Base Sandia National Lab Complex just south of Albuquerque. There is no question that Paul was receiving some sort of electromagnetic signal on his equipment, and it is equally certain that his photos and films do depict unusual lights, most of which were filmed while hovering or maneuvering over the Kirtland-Sandia complex. The real question here, however, is whether Paul's evidence is sufficient to conclude that either of these phenomena was directly related to UFO activity, or whether in fact a prosaic explanation exists which is more directly related to some classified government project. Admittedly, strong arguments can be made in both directions, either one of which can be offered as an adequate explanation of the government's counterintelligence activities in this case, which was the fourth factor. Government surveillance of Paul and his activities, some of which Paul was astute enough to detect and some of which I had learned about but Paul seemed unaware of. Paul took the surveillance activities, which included wiretaps and, according to Paul, even break-ins, as proof positive that he was onto something big. Unfortunately, he seemed largely unaware that the same people who would go to such lengths to spy on him also had the capabilities to mount an effective disinformation campaign. In any case, by mid-1982, Paul's story contained virtually all of the elements found in the current crop of rumors being circulated around the UFO community. There were two groups of aliens, one malevolent, one more friendly, races and humans, for having first made and then broken a secret treaty with the U.S. government, for maintaining a secret underground base under Archuleta Peak near Dulce in northwestern New Mexico, and for having supplied the U.S. government with alien space hardware and weapons which ultimately proved defective or which were caused to crash, thus leaving human civilization virtually defenseless against invasion. According to Paul, an atomic-powered spaceship which they had given to the U.S. had been caused to crash on Archuleta Peak near the entrance to an underground alien base, and it sprayed the entire area with radioactivity and wreckage. To prove it, he provided drawings which he said he had made from photographs. I and others who examined Paul's photographs as well as independently obtained pictures of the same area were unable to see what Paul claimed was there. Where he saw a crashed ship, burned wreckage, entrances to the alien base, and weapons pointing skyward, others could only see rocks, trees, and shadows. I have no doubt that Paul believed that he saw what he claimed, and for this I offer no explanation. I only know that what he claimed to see wasn't what others saw. There is no question that some of Benowitz's pictures are interesting, but I must say that even though I viewed a large number of them, I never saw one that I could get particularly excited about, and I certainly never saw anything that I felt could be pointed to as proof positive or even compelling evidence that he was photographing alien spacecraft. Much of his film was Super 8 millimeter, which is too small a format for good quality enlargement. There is also no question that Paul was intercepting some kind of low-frequency electromagnetic emission. The question was and remains, where was it coming from? What was its purpose? And indeed, most importantly, was it UFO related at all? Paul, at least, was totally convinced that he was receiving alien radio transmissions, and had even gone so far as to develop a home computer program capable of translating them into English. The problem, as I saw it, was that his program, which he told me had been developed with the assistance of the aliens themselves, assigned entire words, sentence fragments, and sometimes even entire sentences themselves to the various individual pulses of energy within these transmissions. The technique involved was such that it could just as easily have been adapted to assign similar alien translations to the various energy pulses found in ordinary Morse code. I have a number of Paul's computer printouts which contain translations of those allegedly alien messages. If one breaks these apart into their component words, sentence fragments, and sentences, and then shuffles the components, the result is such that the new message says virtually the same thing as the old one. The messages look fascinating until one examines the method by which they were derived. After that, they are not nearly so interesting. Unfortunately, lots of people saw the messages. Very few had the opportunity to examine the computer program which generated them. Along these same lines, at least some of the things Paul was seeing and identifying as alien spacecraft were definitely not UFOs at all. One evening while visiting him, we went out in his sundeck just at twilight, and he pointed out a series of lights slowly maneuvering far out over the West Mesa, perhaps 25 or 30 miles away. These, he said, were alien craft involved in abducting people and implanting them. There certainly were lights maneuvering out there, but even through good binoculars, they were not readily identifiable. Paul insisted they were UFOs, and showed us how to conduct a little test with our binoculars, which he said would prove it. Interested, but unconvinced, I drove directly to West Mesa immediately after leaving Paul's home and parked my car at a spot where I felt I would be able to get a good look at anything flying around that area. Sure enough, helicopters carrying large searchlights began to maneuver slowly over my vantage point, only moments after I arrived. One went directly over me at an altitude of about 300 feet, and there is no doubt that it was a helicopter. The next day I called Kirtland, and they confirmed to me that there had indeed been a search and rescue training mission in that area the night before. Such operations, they informed me, were conducted over that area quite frequently. That was in 1982. 2 years later, in 1984, Paul was still making the same claims about these maneuvering lights to other UFO researchers. As far as I'm aware, I was the only one who took the trouble to check. Paul is a convincing and compelling individual in person. He talks an excellent story, and it's easy to see why so many people have been so intrigued by it over the years. Unfortunately, too many of the people who have interviewed Paul have chosen to draw their conclusions about him based solely or largely upon what he says, and not upon the entire body of evidence presented by the larger picture of the case itself. I, too, have spent considerable time with Paul over a period of years and came to know him quite well in that process. As already stated, I viewed a large number of Paul's films and photographs. I carefully examined site and aerial survey photographs of both Archuleta Peak and Mesa, as well as aerial photos of the area taken by Paul himself. I examined the computer program Paul was using to decode the alleged alien radio transmissions and communications. And I had a lengthy discussion about this matter with the late Dr. Alan Hynek, who had also independently examined Paul's program. I spent considerable time discussing the affair with both Jim and Cora Lorenzen, both of whom were quite skeptical of it. And I have copies of many of the reports and letters Paul submitted to APRO beginning as far back as September of 1979. Moreover, as I have already stated, I was personally aware of the intelligence community's concerted efforts to systematically confuse, discourage, and discredit Paul by providing him with a large body of information on the subject of UFOs, the malevolent aliens who allegedly pilot them, the technology they employ, and the underground bases they supposedly possess and occupy. The entire story of a secret treaty between the U.S. government and the aliens, of exchanges of technology between us and the aliens, of battles between aliens and American armed forces, and of aliens allegedly having implanted hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of human beings for the purpose of taking over the world and using us as cattle or slaves, came about as a result of the disinformation process. I know, because I was in a position to observe much of this process as it unfolded, and I was providing regular reports on its effectiveness to some of the very people who were doing it to Paul. And I can tell you that it was effective, because I watched Paul become systematically more paranoid and more emotionally unstable as he tried to assimilate what was happening to him. He had guns and knives all over his house. He had installed extra locks on his doors, and he swore that they, meaning the aliens, were coming through his walls at night and injecting him with hideous chemicals which would knock him out for long periods of time. He told me he had no idea what they were doing with him after he was knocked out. He began to suffer increasing bouts of insomnia. Others took over the day-to-day operation of his business as he went through this. One day, I watched him eat not a bite of his lunch, while he chain-smoked 28 cigarettes in 45 minutes. I knew at that time that he was not far from an inevitable nervous collapse. His health had deteriorated. He had lost considerable weight. His hands shook as if from palsy, and he looked terrible. I tried to counsel him to drop the entire UFO thing before his health was completely destroyed. He said he knew things were getting bad and he was trying to cope with it. Not long afterward, I heard he had been hospitalized and was under psychiatric care. Whether UFOs were actually ever involved with all of this and to what extent, I never really knew. Perhaps Paul had merely stumbled upon signals generated from some sophisticated high-level government project whose security people had hit upon UFO-related disinformation as their ultimate cover. Or perhaps he had discovered a real, although somewhat less sensational government UFO project, if that's possible, which elected to disinform him to protect what they were really doing. I do know from first-hand experience that there was a tremendous amount of government disinformation involved, and that a large proportion of what we are hearing today about malevolent aliens, underground bases, secret treaties with the U.S. government has its roots firmly planted in the Benowitz affair. Stories of an alleged UFO crash at Aztec, New Mexico are also a part of this picture, but I'll save comment on that until later in this paper. In any case, from what I knew of all of this, its purpose was strictly to discredit Benowitz and nothing more. What amazes me is that nearly a decade later, these same stories continue to circulate. Recently, one of the most prominent figures in the current disinformation wave, which has been sweeping the UFO community, was quoted as having stated that he found Paul Benowitz's information to be 100% true. This person spent a couple of days talking to Benowitz back in the summer of 1987, and he has spent considerable time since spreading elaborate and increasingly sensationalistic stories based, he claims, on information gathered from a variety of unnamed sources. Strip away the fluff, and what you have left is essentially the Benowitz story all over again. There is no question in my mind that it's mostly disinformation.
Hey, Grider, the stream cut out. I don't know if you wanted to pause there or if the actual stream itself cut out. Yeah, so I'm going to guess that it cut out. Hold on, I'm bringing Thomas Whitmore back up. So Grider probably stepped away thinking it was all good. So I guess we'll just stop there and have a bit of a conversation about what we just heard.
Backed away from it either in anger or disgust as soon as they discovered what they were dealing with. Even today, the UFO community unanimously considers anyone known or suspected of dealing in disinformation to be one of the bad guys, someone to be shunned or avoided at all costs, and certainly never, ever to be believed. I, on the other hand, determined to take quite a different tack. I would play the disinformation game, get my hands dirty just often enough to lead those directing the process into believing that I was doing exactly what they wanted me to do. And all the while, continue to burrow my way into the matrix so as to learn as much as possible about who was directing it and why. It would be a classic case of turning the tables on the very ones who were most confident that they had the situation well in hand. There was just one thing I needed to do this: secrecy. I couldn't tell anyone about what I was doing. For if I did, and word got back to those in control, I would be immediately cut off and cast adrift before I could learn anything. It was a formidable problem. Some of the contacts I had made during the Benowitz affair seemed friendly and professed a desire to end the UFO cover-up and assist in getting government information on UFOs out to the public in a slow and methodical manner so as not to create panic. Others seemed more interested in obtaining information from me, often on what other members of the UFO community were doing, and sometimes on other completely unrelated subjects. Whatever information I managed to get from these individuals in return usually came as a result of asking just the right questions in just the right ways. Sometimes it took months or even years of establishing a relationship with someone before anything useful came from it. The most difficult part of it all was trying to determine what was real and what was bullshit. One of the key factors in any successful disinformation scheme is that it must contain some elements of truth in order to make it credible. Knowing that, however, is one thing. Doing something with it is quite another. When you're dealing with what you know to be a classified program, and you're determined to get information without breaking any laws and running afoul of national security, you're walking a very fine line. And that's why it takes a long time to get results. In June of 1982, I approached my friend Jamie Chandray and brought him into the project. At that time, I also began briefing Stanton as to what was going on. Both of them knew that I was in contact with a number of people within the intelligence community on the subject of UFOs. And both were aware that at least some of the information coming through was disinformation. But both only had minimal knowledge of the private goals and conclusions I had established some months earlier. As the project progressed, this actually turned out to be more of an asset than a drawback. Indeed, the three of us were an excellent team in that we each approached the problem from a different angle. From my point of view, the process was one of slowly and methodically burrowing into a beehive from the outside with the goal of ultimately reaching the queen bee and the royal jelly at the center. Since I never knew whether the other bees I was certain to meet along the way would be friendly or not, I had to proceed cautiously, both in order to avoid getting stung and to learn as much as possible about what might lie ahead. The control factor, as I saw it, rested largely with me and the way I proceeded. Jamie, on the other hand, saw it as a somewhat different process. He too felt we were burrowing into a beehive. But in his view of things, our burrowing was at the express invitation of the Queen Bee herself, who clandestinely oversaw and encouraged the process from a distance as part of her private plan to get free of politics that surrounds and restrains her. As long as we followed the signposts along the way, Jamie felt, the learning process would continue and we could never get stung. Stanton, as the scientist of the group, was the one best qualified to conduct a careful and organized search for corroborating witnesses and evidence in places outside of the loop Jamie and I were part of. And by the way, just as a matter of personal privilege here, I would like to react to a nasty comment about Stanton which appeared in a recent issue of Jim Mosley's Saucer Smear newsletter. In this comment, the writer, after first characterizing Stanton as a gullible individual, went on to wonder whether he could be trusted to expose the MJ-12 documents as phony if his research turned up conclusive evidence to that effect. It's a legitimate question, and I'd like to answer it by stating that not only Stanton, but all of us are firmly committed to releasing a full and complete report on this matter. If evidence should come to light suggesting that the documents are phony, you have my firm assurance that it will most certainly be included in the report. Gullibility is not an issue here. The matter is far larger than that. In any case, Stanton, Jamie, and I are all working toward the same goal, that of trying to discover what is truth and what isn't with respect to the government and UFOs. My role in the Benowitz affair had at least secured me a seat in the right theater. From there, it was only a question of whether I could use my balcony ticket to discover who owned the place and was making the major operational decisions. Both Jamie and I felt that in order to have any hope of success at all, we absolutely had to play the game according to their rules. That meant doing everything possible to give the appearance that we were essentially useful idiots who would cause no trouble, while at the same time playing the double game of keeping our eyes and ears open in order to learn as much as we could about what was going on. In so doing, we were gradually able to expand our base of friendly contact people, while working our way further and further through the bizarre intelligence labyrinth that surrounds the subject of UFOs. I have no problem in telling you that it's been a tedious, time and resource-consuming task which has been made all the more difficult by the constant barrage of rocks, hoots, and bottles thrown in our direction from a segment of the UFO community which out of ignorance chose to take up unfriendly and unsympathetic positions toward us. Were it not for the fact that we were constantly challenged by the twists and turns of our project and by the hope that we could ultimately come away from it with a smoking gun in hand, I'm convinced we would have thrown in the towel a long time ago. Indeed, I must admit that there were several occasions when we tried to do just that, only to be encouraged to continue by some of our friends from the inside who had come to believe in what we were doing and respected us for it. The anonymous arrival of the so-called MJ-12 documents in December of 1984 was another factor we had to contend with in this increasingly confusing web. The problem of their origin and authenticity was and remains a major issue. And on this point, our position of neutrality has constantly been misinterpreted. Therefore, for the record, it is important to point out here once again that at no time have either I or any of my associates ever stated that these documents are authentic. Our position has consistently been that we do not know whether they are authentic, but that we as investigators remain unaware of any convincing evidence which would suggest that they are not. That position remains essentially unchanged today, and I'll have more to say about it when I get to the end of this paper. The bottom line, however, is that authentic or not, the story of the documents is a major story, and one which, as I've already assured you, will ultimately be told when the time is ready to tell it. That process has already taken considerably longer than I had thought it would, I cannot predict when it will be complete, but I can say that progress has been made, and I, for one, certainly hope it won't be too much longer. For the many of you who have roundly criticized our methodology throughout the MJ-12 controversy, it seems important to note here that what you were witnessing was the operation of a plan to put out just enough of this bizarre information to attract attention, and then carefully monitor who showed up with questions to ask or information to offer. Once again, I was careful to state that I remained unconvinced of the authenticity of the information involved. In the case of the Falcon and Condor interviews broadcast last October on UFO Cover-Up Live, I'm convinced that at least some of that information falls under the category of disinformation. I'm equally convinced that some of it is true. The important point here is that regardless of whether it is disinformation or truth, it does have to do with UFOs. And the sources who provided it felt that doing so was important enough to risk going before national television in order to accomplish that purpose. Remember also that those sources knew that Falcon and Condor would be identified on the show as confidential government informants. The risk was all theirs, not ours. And still they went ahead, just as they are currently going ahead with the process of arranging a meeting which will enable them to tell their stories before one or more members of Congress. I submit to you that such a process is extraordinary, regardless of the truth or deception involved. And I think it's high time the UFO community stopped throwing rocks at it and began to consider the implications. One thing I can assure you is that rocks or not, our project will continue. You can either become involved, as others in the UFO community have done, or you can sit back and wait for results. Whatever those results, good, bad, positive, or negative, you will hear about them. Our trolling of the bait by means of a progressive release of information and ultimately by arranging for Falcon and Condor to appear on the UFO Cover-Up Live show produced a variety of interesting results. Shortly after the show, the FBI showed up and began asking questions about it. They even arranged for a private showing in the office of producer Michael Seligman. Agents on both East and West Coasts interviewed a number of ufologists and other people, including Jamie Chanderay. But although I let it be known that I'd be more than happy to talk to them, they avoided me. This I found to be particularly interesting in light of the FBI's admission in response to a FOIA request that they have nearly 60 pages of material on me that is all classified for reasons of national security. That was in July of 1988. I still have no idea what those pages contain. Another thing that occurred, as we had hoped it would, was that a rather small number of people came out of the woodwork claiming to have inside knowledge of one type or another about MJ-12 or similar government UFO projects. After weeding out the obvious cranks and several others whose claims did not check out, or whose stories changed every time they told them, we were left with a few leads which seemed promising. It's premature to offer you a report on these at this time because we're still checking. Also, seemingly in direct relationship to our partial release of MJ-12 material 2 years ago, the flow of UFO-related disinformation has escalated from a point of near insignificance to what has become almost a flood tide. Indeed, many of you in the audience came here tonight looking for answers to questions related directly to that problem. As I have taken great pains to point out, the current crop of disinformation is really nothing new. It's just that a different crop of people are spreading it this time around. I expect that those responsible, not the rumor mongers themselves, but the ones who are feeding them, thought it would work just as well this time as it did last. The one thing I'm sure they didn't count on is that I would tell my story and thus blow their cover. And speaking of blowing cover, blowing cover, I think it's high time that I tell you what I know about another situation that has found its way into the current crop of UFO disinformation.
I think that's a pretty good spot to stop at, just for, the flow of it. So speakers, you guys go on and, tell us what you think.
It totally escaped me that, he had a screening with the FBI, with UFO Cover Up Live. Did I hear that right? I think that's what was said. That, kind of blew my mind. Also, he had a 60-page, classified document on him personally, but that would make sense if he was involved in his counterintelligence operation. But, that'd be really interesting if any of us could ever get our hands on that, but I doubt that.
Well, Grant Cameron has complained that he hasn't been able to get Moore's complete file from FOIA, but part of his file is available.
I'll just, it's funny to see a lot of the parallels with the topic
Hello, can you hear
today.
me?
Talking about getting people before Congress and even...
Sorry, Steve, I think you can't hear Thomas. I'm going to recycle you real quick.
Part of Bill Moore's file, FBI file, is available, and he was interviewed by the FBI. I'm not exactly sure where in the timeline that occurred, but I think it was before UFO Cover-Up Live.
Yeah, guys, so, I had to, I guess I have to recycle myself almost every time that I pause it, but I'm back, so, yeah.
Hey, Steve, you can go now if you can hear us.
Yeah, so sorry if I cut somebody off there. I just thought nobody was talking for a minute, so sorry about that. I just thought it was interesting to see a lot of the parallels to today in the topic. He mentioned about trying to get people before Congress to testify, and just the kind of the familiar message that it's really not even important if the MJ-12 docs are real or if they are a hoax. The important thing is getting the message out there and the cover up and getting more attention to it. And those were just some things that I saw that are still repeating today. And just like Moore said, the disinformation in quotes isn't new. It's just the people are new and the narratives are always repeating.
Yeah, it's almost like not we, but like the field in general doesn't learn from its own mistakes. Also I know we're getting to Benowitz now, but the mention of him smoking, what was it, like 20 plus cigarettes or even more than that over the course of like a half hour, just really gives you it's just so much insight into the state of mind of who he was at the time when this was going on, and I found that really interesting as well.
Does anybody know has there ever been any talk about him having a drug history? Because that sounds like stimulant, like maybe he could have been on some type of stimulant smoking that many cigarettes, or maybe it was, he was maybe going through like a manic state, but I wouldn't be surprised if, I'm not going to speculate, but Thomas, do you know if there was any history of drug use by Paul Benowitz?
No, we don't. As far as I know, we don't have any medical history on him, which of course would be confidential. All we hear are stories and rumors about him being hospitalized. I think he was hospitalized at some point, but I'm not sure for how long and exactly when. I will say this though, I don't know if you all have ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, but part of the Benowitz story reminds me of that movie.
Oh wow, yeah, that's a great parallel. Thomas, I did have a question. So why would, in your opinion, would the FBI have contacted anybody from UFO Cover Up Live, and specifically to schedule a private screening with a couple of agents? Like, does that make any sense to you?
Oh yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. And if it was a disinformation effort, or if it was an effort to try to get some of the information to the public, or maybe there was some classified information in the presentation, they would have a follow-up on that. And as rational as these agencies seem at times, they do keep information from each other. So the DIA could be running a project and not inform the FBI. So it could be something like that.
Oh, that
do you
makes
think
sense.
Do you think it's a possibility that, because here's something that that popped into my head when I was thinking about why Doty would have been investigated allegedly by the FBI twice, but do you think it has something to do with maybe them trying to figure out who was manufacturing these these fake government documents, right? Because the documents were, I mean, I know it's not necessarily, I don't know, maybe it's a crime to produce, counterfeit government documents and pass them off. Like, there's got to be a crime somewhere. There's got to be some code that's got to be illegal. And there were people that were profiting off of that. So, and the documents were made very well. And so they could have been investigating that angle, because if a person can make good fake documents and, who knows what they're making documents, for. I mean, it could be something that could, seriously harm the government, be passed off in a, some type of espionage situation, like, right? That was a possibility that popped into my head. Yeah, I don't know, Thomas, do you think there's any credence to that?
Well, the first impulse after the documents came out was the FBI and
84?
Yeah, well, they came out in 87. They became public in 87. But the FBI and maybe some other elements in the government wanted to know if they were classified, if they were actually classified. And the main thing that the government worries about is the leakage or disclosure of unauthorized classified information. So that was their first purpose, was to find out, one, were had the documents been properly classified, and two, had any classified information leaked into the public.
One thing that I found kind of interesting when I was doing a timeline recently, like a chronology, is that Doty was still active duty when he went and did that interview for the Cover Up Live. He was still of course, I think by that point, actually, I don't know, the timeline is that it's like 1986, March or May of 1986 is when Doty went to Dayton, Ohio and did the interview in that hotel room for Cover Up Live. And it's obviously him portraying himself as Falcon. We know, of course, they claim that it was like him being a surrogate Falcon. And then, but he was Falcon in that interview. And if he was still active duty, there's just some implications there that he could have got. Is that maybe why he got in trouble? I know that the story is that he got caught faking documents, faking reports of relationships that he had with, double agents, in Germany when he was stationed there, right there. Do you know anything about that, Thomas? Like, do you know if maybe he could have got in trouble for doing the Cover Up Live thing while he was on active duty?
Well, I don't know if he got in trouble for that, but if he did it, obviously the material, the Falcon interview was taped before the Cover Up Live show aired. And I don't know where you got the date of 1986. I'd like to know, but I don't know when the interview was actually taped. But, whether he was on active duty or not, if he was on active duty, I think it's safe to presume that he was doing it under orders. And, but he left the Air Force in the fall of 1988, about the same time that the UFO Cover Up Live program aired. And yes, he did get in trouble in Europe. I don't know the details, but I just know that he got in trouble over there.
Yeah, UFO Cover Up Live
My
also
source,
marks of just a bigger operation where Doty's, kind of just on the boots on the ground, but the people that orchestrated that entire thing, I think, go well beyond Doty. Even getting the footage from the Air Force Base of all the lights in the sky and the promise of the Holloman footage, I think that's above Doty's pay grade, to be honest.
One thing to note too is that Doty actually walked out of that interview pissed off, apparently, is what happened. And I think my source is Doty, unfortunately, or at least Doty and Collins, the guy that he co-wrote. I know there's some controversy on whether he really co-authored that or if there was his name just put on there by Collins. But the guy that he is, put down on record as being co-authored of that book, Data Disclosure, I think, that's where that information came from about the meeting in Dayton, Ohio, 1986. But I'll take a screenshot of it and I'll post it up in the Nest. And if anybody wants to take a look up in the Nest, I'm slowly posting source material for stuff that I'm hearing in the speech as we come to it. That way you guys can kind of have a visual, for instance, what Falcon looked like in that Cover Up Live interview and some other source material. So just, be checking up in the Nest every once in a while and, see if there's something that interests you.
My understanding of that book with Collins is that he went ahead without Doty's approval I'm not sure. I think it started off that they were writing it together and maybe something happened, but Doty claims that he did that without him. And if you check the description of the book, it labels Doty as a contributor and as a source. So there's some interesting history in there, and I wonder if anyone's been able to get in contact with him and actually get his side of the story. Because Doty to this day alleges that Collins did that without his knowledge. As how much he didn't know, I'm not sure. But I always found that interesting. And a couple key takeaways from what we just heard. You hear more already establishing kind of his alibi in a sense, where he was trying to burrow into the beehive to get the quote unquote jelly. You see him setting himself up as some sort of martyr of sorts, which is, I guess, integral to his version of events. And then also another note too is that people apparently were going to Benowitz, getting information from him and spreading it within the UFO community that weren't Bill Moore, because Bill Moore mentioned somebody, he doesn't name them, but he says that so-and-so has gone to Benowitz, taken his story, said all these things, and have disseminated within the community and made these sensationalist claims that have just kind of run rampant. I found that pretty interesting. It means that Benowitz was a source for, a lot of people, whether they know it or not, which laid down the foundation for a lot of stuff that we still hear today. So it didn't just come from Moore, and I think that's a pretty interesting thing to bookmark.
Well, Benowitz
Well,
was
we know that he
friends.
was
Yeah,
talking to John Lear, right? Oh, dang, all three of us. All right, I'll let you guys fight it out. You guys, Steve and Thomas.
Yeah, he had talked to Linda Howe. Linda Howe was spreading a lot of it around, and John Lear was spreading it around. But when these rumors really started to swirl, other UFO people, started approaching Benowitz. One of them was Christian Lambright, who wrote the book X Descending, and it has a lot of good information about Benowitz in there. And he thought very highly of Benowitz and was very defensive of him. But word started to get around, and Linda Howe and John Lear were spreading a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people don't realize how involved in the community Benowitz was. And, he was going to UFO conferences, and he was interacting with other well-known researchers, and he was sharing his, theories and his photos and videos and things amongst the community, and, giving speeches at UFO conferences and stuff. And so definitely a lot of his information was filtering pretty quickly down into the community, or the disinformation, for sure. And I just wanted to, as far as the, Doty in silhouette interview, I know that it's been said by, many people, and I think Doty's never really admitted that was him, but apparently that was filmed like a few years before the UFO Cover-Up Live, and it's part of another documentary or, movie that Moore and Chandray were trying to make, and that was, it never really got produced, but apparently that was footage that was intended to be used for that a couple of years before the UFO Cover-Up Live. But I just wanted to clarify, when you were talking about, I think you said you talked to Rick Doty, and he said that he left that interview kind of upset. Are you talking about the one where he was in silhouette? Did he admit that he was in that interview?
Nope.
I just want to add that I had never heard that before, but Bill Moore was actually selling tapes of the so-called Falcon tapes, and the Falcon tapes, which were, I assume, these interviews, in shadow, like Doty or whoever was in shadow. He was advertising that out of his Focus newsletter. I don't have the date on me right now, but I have it in my files. So there are some people out there that probably have VHS tapes of these interviews.
Interesting. I didn't know that they had been disseminated before. If I'm not mistaken, and I think Christian Lambright's talked about this among others, but I thought that there was another book/film project that they were working on. It might have been called Project Aquarius, and I hope I'm not crossing two unrelated wires here. But I thought that the film project that never really came to fruition was related to that, the Project Aquarius book, whatever.
Moore was supposedly working on a book. It was going to be called Magic 12 or something like that, and supposedly with some information from Doty, and the journalist from the National Enquirer, Bob Pratt, was writing the narrative for it, and I have a copy of it on file. It's been circulating in the UFO community for years, but they were working on a book, but it was never produced, published, or disseminated publicly like that. And I think there was some concern about copyright, maybe from Pratt or from Moore or someone.
I'd buy those tapes for $1. One also interesting thing, I thought that when Bill Moore was talking about his investigation into the Majestic 12 documents, how he named that he had insiders that believed in what he was doing related to those documents, that, when they were on the verge of giving up, I don't want to say they changed their mind, but they were definitely swayed by these people in order to keep trekking. So I'm not saying outright that, there were disinformation agents in contact with them, but it's just interesting to note that he doesn't name, but he labels insiders related to that project that really believed in what he was doing with it. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, a lot of those insiders are probably the people in the aviary list that we know today, and the core aviary, as I see it from the 1970s on, was Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallée, and Kit Green. And you look at the aviary list, and if you listen to Doty talk, he'll say, well, Bill Moore had his own sources. And I think a lot of those were on the aviary. I don't know if the aviary list was all of it, but I think a lot of them were.
That's a great point, damn. Hal Puthoff and Kit Green, again at the center of it somehow. It's just funny how their names always come up time and time again.
All right, so I just posted a list of. All right, I posted a lot. Shout out to BWP if they're in the. I don't see them down there, but thank you for that post that you put up. I put it up in the nest. I also posted the Project Aquarius document. I posted a list of who was supposed to be in the aviary, and a couple of other things. And I kind of got backed out. Like, I just had to recycle myself about 10 times. Did you guys talk about the connection between Benowitz and John Lear? Because that's what I was wanting to talk about when, Steve Long and
No.
Mr. Whitmore and I all talked at once.
Go for it.
Okay, so you guys didn't cover that? All right. So Benowitz, this has been talked about by John Lear multiple times over the years, and I think it was verified by Doty too, and take that for whatever it means to you. But Benowitz was contacted by John Lear because Benowitz, his story was known to he was very popular within the UFO community during that time, and so was John Lear, and they became kind of pen pals back then. And Benowitz was passing along a lot of the information that he was getting from the AFOSI guys, and of course stuff that he was seeing firsthand during his surveillance of Kirtland Air Force Base. He was passing on to John Lear stories like the Dulce Bay story that came straight from Benowitz, went to John Lear, ended up being passed by John Lear on to Bob Lazar. He had his own variation of the Dulce Bay story, but it was set at Area 51. And then of course Phil Schneider got the story from John Lear, who got it from Benowitz, and that's where the Phil Schneider Dulce Bay story comes from. But also, Bill Cooper was friends with John Lear, and Bill Cooper, Behold a Pale Horse, that was the book that he wrote, legendary book, legendary guy. He was, anyways, you guys can Google him. But Bill Cooper, William Bill Cooper, he's the one that a lot of his core, UFO story that he used to write about and discuss, on blogs, that was what Chris Carter based the X-Files TV show off of. Not strictly, but a lot of the original X-Files, the first couple of seasons, that mythology, was based off of the writings of Bill Cooper and the stories of Bill Cooper, who got a lot of his stuff, from John Lear. So it's like it all kind of ties in together. It's like a cancer, it's spread all over. And it's amazing to kind of, I don't know, that's what we're here doing. That's the point of this space. That's at least one of the goals of this space and this group, guys, is to figure out exactly how much this is permeated, find out exactly, how, what's real and what's not, and what's based off of proven disinformation, campaigns. So that's, this is really this was how this group started. So I think we're making great progress. And, does anybody else have anything before I start back?
Yeah. And also just the history of this and, other things as we go on, you tend to see that history repeats itself. And if we don't actually look at what happened and the people before us who, went through it and went on record about it, we're never going to learn and we're never going to be able to progress forward. So I think that's also another aim of this space. And I hope that people have been listening are starting to get an idea of how the wheels of ufology turn. And every time it turns, it's very similar to the cycle before it. So hopefully, if it's not us, maybe the next person, who knows, that there can be a change somewhere and we can, just have a different outcome next time around. But yeah, I appreciate you, Grider, for hosting these spaces and doing this.
No, guys, I like this. Hey, trust me, if it was just me, then nothing would be getting done. Let's give a shout out to Thomas Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore has been around the community since 1993, if I remember correctly, Mr. Whitmore. 1993. Think about that. It's he's such a wealth of knowledge. He's, trust me, he's constantly correcting me when I, accidentally spread some, misinformation, which I do a lot. I accidentally, everybody makes mistakes. I make a lot of them. That's why Mr. Thomas Whitmore, we're so thankful. We're so appreciative of your time, Thomas. We really, truly are. I cannot stress that enough. And then UFO Mean Girls, for agreeing to do this when you didn't really know me. Thanks a lot. And thanks to Steve. Dude, just thanks to everybody, really. And, this would be nothing without every single one of you. And I truly mean that. I couldn't do, nobody wants to hear me, try to ramble through, some crap that I'm doing right now. So, let's go to UFO intros and then we'll start back to the speech. And this will be, this speech, the last 50 minutes, which is what we're going to try to plow through, is it's amazing. It's amazing to listen to. And I probably listened to the speech probably 10 times in the past couple of years, and it never gets old. So, Kimball, what's up?
Yeah, I just want to say, this is a great space, guys. I've loved this. It's not the first time I've heard, UFO Mean Girls, UFO Mean Face, my bad, talk about, how Hal Puthoff seems to be at the center of a lot of this. And I will say, like, the Jack Sarfati space today was very entertaining, right? Like, I could talk about my favorite parts, but one thing that he said that I'm curious to know what you guys think, if what his opinion even means on this, but he was saying that basically Hal Puthoff recently is like not doing so well mentally, and he's there's some cognitive decline, like he's in his 90s. And so I just wonder if like is there anything left to be gleaned from Hal Puthoff, and if so, like how would we even get that information? Like what are the core questions we should be asking, I guess?
Well, it's hard to substantiate that, So, I mean, yeah, I'll let Thomas field that. I think he'd have a better answer than I would. Because I personally, I just don't trust Sarfati. I think Pandolfi is playing his strings, at least in my eyes. But, yeah.
I had the fortunate privilege to have lunch with Dr. Puthoff last year, and he was very, very nice, but he told me absolutely nothing. And I've heard him say more than once, or I've heard it said more than once, that he signed so many non-disclosure agreements, he doesn't know what he can say.
Well, hopefully there's an opportunity for him to just come out and say it. If he is, he's no spring chicken. He's got to know that. I can't imagine he'd want to go to his grave, not talking about any of the things that he's been dying to talk about for the last 10 years, all because of some silly NDA.
He's still the executive. He's still the chairman of the board of TTSA, right? He's still like the top dog over there. As far as like I've been able to tell, because I try to keep track of like that type of stuff for this site that I help out with called the Little Sis Project. It's about like mapping public accountability through like financial statements and stuff like that, and like mind mapping power. I'll put a link to it up in the nest. But as far as I know, isn't Hal Puthoff? He's still the chairman of the board, right?
I was just gonna say, so there's all these predictions, right, about when all this is gonna go down. We've heard like 2025, 26, 27, 2030, whatever. What if all of it just like correlates with Hal Puthoff's like kill switch deathbed confessions, and then suddenly we like learn a bunch of stuff?
Anything's possible.
Can I give you some advice? Don't pay attention to any of those dates. We've been hearing stuff like that. I mean, I've been in this for 30 years, and I've been hearing stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all like it's fun to think about, but I mean, I'll post a list up in the nest. I mean, it's like a list that I made of all the failed prophecy predictions, and all that. It's just then it's going to be 2032. It's going to be it's all based on nonsense. So all right, guys. So we're gonna listen. We're gonna try to power through this last 50 minutes. This is the climax of. I mean, this is it. This is the end of the speech. This next 50 minutes is what kind of shaped like. This is it. Like, this is the climax. There's no more build up. So after that, we'll have a discussion, and thanks everybody. And, here we go.
I offer this not to embarrass the person involved, but rather to shed light on an incident which, by the accounts of it, have appeared recently in a variety of UFO newsletters and at least one new book. Aztec rumor. Rick indicated he knew nothing about the matter and asked me to tell him everything I could. I did so, and as I recall, he took some notes. We discussed a number of other things as well. Some months later, in early 1983, I became aware that Rick was involved with a team of several others, including one fellow from Denver that I knew of, and at least one who was working out of Washington, D.C., in playing an elaborate disinformation game against a prominent cattle mutilation researcher who, at the time, had close connections with a major television film company interested in doing a UFO documentary. Although I was not in a position to know everything about what was going on, I had
not hearing anything.
I'm gonna DM him. Oh, Greider, right during the climax. Say it ain't so. Sorry, guys. We're trying to figure it out. I'm trying to get in contact with him. Oh, I saw his mic.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, there he is.
All right. Did you guys hear any of the speech at all?
No, you completely cut out.
God, this app, dude. It's like, all right. Let's try it again.
Access to enough of it to conclude that the government seemed hell-bent on severing the ties that existed between the researcher and the film company. My understanding was that because the researcher was known to have close ties to Benowitz and had exhibited a strong interest in his work, certain elements within the intelligence community were concerned that the story of his having intercepted electromagnetic emissions from the Kirtland-Sandia area would end up as part of the script of a feature film. Since this, in turn, might influence others, possibly even the Soviets, to attempt similar interceptions, someone in a control position apparently felt it had to be stopped before it got out of hand. In any case, the prime objective of the counterintelligence...
All right, you guys can't hear me again?
We can hear you.
I can hear you, but the narrative just stopped.
Okay, okay. Never mind. I got the DMs that caught back up. Yeah, sorry. All right, so I'll restart it.
Intelligence people who swarmed around Benowitz between 1980 and 84 seemed to be the maintenance of a high-level security net around the radio signals he was intercepting. I was unable to determine why this was a priority at the time, and I still do not know today. What I do know, however, is that since they couldn't physically stop Paul from intercepting these signals, and since they hadn't been successful in enlisting his voluntary silence, they fell back on a wall of disinformation as the best way to confuse the issue, and ultimately to call his credibility into question. When the filmmaker appeared on the scene, and it looked as if Paul's story might become part of the script, the counterintelligence people simply extended their disinformation activities accordingly. Part of this game involved a meeting between the cattle mutilation researcher in question, Agent Richard Doty, and others at the AFOSI office at Kirtland Air Force Base, wherein the researcher subsequently claimed to have been allowed to view certain purportedly sensitive documents about the government's alleged involvement with UFOs. Part of this material included information about an alleged UFO crash retrieval at Aztec. Richard Doty, who's bound by a security oath, cannot, and I am told will not, discuss this matter, except to say that he broke no laws and gave away no secrets that day. That, insofar as I'm aware, is entirely correct. I, on the other hand, was never required to sign a security oath, and am therefore breaking no laws when I tell you quite candidly that the information which changed hands on that day was directly descended from the discussion Doty and I had had only a few months earlier. I can also tell you that it was a very effective deception, because the researcher involved continues to believe this information and actively continues to try to convince others of its truth even now, more than 6 years after the fact. Unfortunately, there was no UFO crash at Aztec, nor was there much truth to any of the other material supplied to this particular researcher, either at that meeting or during later encounters. The much-touted alien harvest is really a dismal crop failure. To the best of my knowledge, it was all disinformation, and I was the unfortunate one who had unwittingly supplied the fuel to those who were spreading the fire. I've held my silence on this matter for more than 6 years. Now you know the truth. Disinformation is a strange and bizarre game. Those who play it are completely aware that an operation's success is dependent upon dropping information upon a target or mark in such a way that the person will accept it as truth and will repeat and even defend it to others as if it were true. Once this has been accomplished, we certainly have a number of rude people in this audience. That's too bad. Once this has been accomplished, the work of the counterintelligence specialist is complete. They can simply withdraw in the confidence that the dirty work of spreading their poison seeds will be done by others. Those who want proof of how well the process works need only look around you. Every time one of you repeats an unverified or unsubstantiated bit of information without qualifying it as such, you are contributing to that process. And every time you do it, somebody in a need-to-know position sits back and has a horse laugh at your expense. One final comment on the Aztec hoax is that 2 other individuals who self-published a voluminous book, UFO Crash at Aztec, on the affair in 1987, chose to completely omit any mention of my extensive research on the case, which had been published 2 years earlier, and which both researchers had copies of. It's a classic case of the book's principal author having decided that his conclusion would be before even beginning the process of investigating, and then ignoring everything which didn't fit. One of the problems the ufology movement has with its image is that there are a significant number of people involved with it who not only support this sort of journalism, but encourage it. The next section of this presentation will deal with questions and answers, but the format will be a bit different, in that I will not take questions from the audience, but have elected to incorporate a number of questions and their answers directly into the body of this paper. Question number 1. Am I currently involved with providing information to any government agency about UFOs or about people involved with the UFO phenomenon? Answer: no. I have not had any such involvement since 1984.
Frankly, I'm a little ashamed of some people in this audience, regardless of what you believe, what you hear, or not. This is not a debate. It is a paper trying to be presented. Now, please show a little courtesy.
Thank you. I'll repeat that question. Am I currently involved with providing information to any government agency about UFOs or about people involved with the UFO phenomenon? Answer: no. I have not had any such involvement since 1984. The extent and the scope of that involvement were essentially as I have already outlined to you and nothing more. Question 2. Am I presently involved in knowingly spreading any sort of disinformation about UFOs? Answer: no. The only conscious involvement I have ever had with a disinformation operation was that which I have already outlined in connection with the Benowitz case. Question 3. Am I presently or have I ever been on the payroll of any agency of the U.S. government? No. Question 4. What about my involvement with UFO researcher Lee Graham? Answer: earlier in this paper, I told you of how I was recruited to supply information on Mr. Benowitz in 1980. The exact wording in my statement was, Benowitz and to a lesser extent several other individuals. One of those other individuals was Lee Graham. This began in 1983, if memory serves. It's important to note here that in addition to being a UFO researcher, Lee is also an avid military aircraft buff. As far as I'm aware, the counterintelligence people were primarily interested in him because at the time, Lee was making a lot of inquiries and collecting a great deal of information on the then very highly classified stealth aircraft program. Apparently there was some question as to why he was so interested in obtaining information on so sensitive a subject. In other words, was he using it solely to satisfy a personal curiosity, or was he passing it on to others who perhaps had foreign intelligence connections? There seemed to be only minimal interest in his UFO activities. Lee is a completely above-board individual who is a loyal U.S. citizen. In the process of keeping in touch with him, we became good friends. His knowledge of the fact that I had friends in the intelligence community gradually evolved into the firm belief on his part that I was much more than I really was. The ID card story, which has become the subject of so much speculation lately, stems from nothing more than a practical joke which has simply gotten out of hand. Since the story surrounding it is somewhat longer than the time here will allow, I will commit to publishing it later in our newsletter so that it will be on record for anyone interested in the facts. The fact is, I do not hold a government ID card. But think about it for just one moment. If I did, does it make sense that I'd pull it out of my wallet and show it to Lee Graham, or anybody else for that matter? Question 5. Is it true that several hours of interviews with the source codenamed Falcon were videotaped, some in the presence of bona fide members of the news media? And is it true, as some have alleged, that those tapes were confiscated by the U.S. government? Answer. Yes, it is true that those tapes were made. And no, it is not true that they were confiscated. They are still in our possession. Question 6. Is it true that I've characterized the cattle mutilation phenomenon as a hoax? Answer. No. Question 7. Do I know anything about the so-called Ellsworth Air Force Base humanoid case of 1977 and the documents associated with it? Answer. Yes. Some people have characterized this case as a hoax, while others have attributed it to official disinformation. It's my position that this was a special counterintelligence training exercise in the creation and dissemination of disinformation. And yes, Richard Doty, who was stationed at Ellsworth at the time, was clearly a part of it, but not in any capacity where he would have been responsible for creating the documents involved. Question 8. Do I know anything about the so-called Weitzel letter? Answer, yes. The letter, which is loosely based upon an actual UFO case, was written anonymously to APRO in July of 1980 by Richard Doty, is directly related to the Benowitz affair. Essentially, it was bait. AFOSI knew that Benowitz had close ties with the APRO organization at the time, and they were interested in recruiting someone within the organization who would be in a position to provide them with feedback on Benowitz's activities and communications. Since I was an APRO board member, the Weitzel letter was passed to me for action shortly after it had been received. It was not long thereafter that I came to know Richard Doty and began to provide him with information about Benowitz and his case. Question 9. What do I know about the so-called Aquarius document, which purports to be a facsimile of the AFOSI message, with a few spurious additions on the document? It was created by AFOSI, or at least I always assumed it was, and it was handed to me in February 1981 with the intention that I would pass it to Benowitz. My understanding, although I never knew for sure, was that Benowitz was expected to wave it to the press and others as proof of what he was saying about an alien invasion, at which point the document would be denounced as a counterfeit and Benowitz would be further discredited. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, depending upon one's point of view, it didn't turn out that way. A highlighted version of this document showing the real information and the added information appears in the current issue of our newsletter, which will be available at our table out in the lobby. I might also add that the entire text of this speech is also in there. One additional bit of information about this document is the way that it came to be known to the UFO community. In September of 1982, insofar as I was aware, there were only 3 copies of this document in existence. One of these I had given to Benowitz. The second was in safekeeping, and a third was in my briefcase during a trip which I had made to San Francisco. While there, I had a morning meeting with a man who turned out later to be an associate of ufologist Peter Gersten. That same afternoon, my car was broken into, and the briefcase was stolen. There is a police report, by the way, on file in San Francisco. 4 months later, a copy of that same document, complete with annotations I had penciled on it, turned up in the hands of none other than Gersten himself. To this day, I have never received a satisfactory explanation of how he obtained it. Question 10. What about the AFOSI documents which speak of a 1980 UFO landing near a nuclear storage facility within the Kirtland Air Force Base complex? Are these documents more disinformation, or are they authentic? Answer: to the best of my knowledge, they are authentic. Question 11. What about other documents which I've either alluded to having or have published portions of without providing further details? Answer: there are a number of these, and they came to us in several different ways. None of them, however, seem to have any direct connection to the Benowitz case, nor, as far as I can tell, was Richard Doty directly involved in supplying them to us. Whether they are legitimate or disinformation, or more likely a combination of both, is still a matter of question. Once we have completed our study of these materials, we will make them available as well. Our publication of expurgated copies of some of this material also served a definite purpose, but that's another story. Question number 12. UFO basher Phil Klass has been the topic of a number of rumors lately to the effect that he's an active government disinformation agent. What do I think about that? Answer: Mr. Klass is a very astute individual who has long been a close follower of my activities. Indeed, I believe he was the only one out of the entire UFO community who managed to figure out what I and my associates were up to. And it horrified him. In my opinion, the very idea that someone might actually be capable of getting far enough into the UFO problem to unmask his debunking claims constituted a personal threat to him that had to be dealt with. He has been obsessed with doing everything possible to try to either stop or discredit us ever since. The handout he passed around today to many of you is just another example of it. As to his motives, I think it's best left to Mr. Klass to explain why he behaves as he does. Perhaps Phil bashes UFOs and the people who see them for the same reason that other people tear the wings off of flies. But perhaps he gets well paid to do what he does. If there's nothing to UFOs, as he's consistently claimed, then I can't imagine why he gets so emotional about them. Unless, of course, it's all part of the script. Phil's been bashing UFOs for over 20 years now. In that process, he's always been very quick to ascribe ulterior motives to the people who report them and investigate them. There are a lot of people in this audience who would be very interested in hearing what his ulterior motives are. Why does Mr. Klass bash UFOs? I, for one, would welcome a rational explanation of just why a man would devote 20 years of his life to an essentially one-man crusade against something that he claims doesn't exist. If he's not spreading disinformation, if he's not on some government or private payroll, then just what is he up to, and precisely what does he hope to accomplish by it? How about it, folks? How many of you would like to hear what makes Klass tick? I think he owes us all an explanation of what, in my opinion, and I'm sure in that of many others here, has been 20 long years of unprofessional attitude. As a matter of fact, I think he owes a lot of people an apology, myself included. The pages of my newsletter are open to you, Phil. Whenever you're ready to explain yourself, we'll be more than happy to print it. And now, having gotten that out of the way, it seems to be an appropriate place to tell you the story of man's first contact with the Martians. During a worldwide telecast of the Martian ambassador's press conference, The following dialogue transpired. Reporter: tell me, Mr. Martian, what sort of social structure do you have on Mars? Martian: well, we're all devout communists. There are no cares or worries in our society, and we are all extremely happy. Reporter: well, what's the one thing about living on Mars that makes your people the happiest? Martian: well, that's a very easy question. You see, unlike the people on Earth, we on Mars enjoy the distinct advantage of living in a completely classless society. So moving from the humorous back to the serious, here's question 13. What do I think of Whitley Strieber and his claims of being a UFO abductee? Answer: at first I was highly skeptical and admittedly somewhat jealous of Whitley. As a result, I undertook to get to know the man in order to assess things for myself. In that process, he's earned my respect, my admiration, and my friendship. Whitley has come very close to the truth in a number of ways, and although still somewhat baffled by his own experiences, he's found a very acceptable way of accommodating them into his life. If one makes a conscious effort to remove Whitley's emotional reactions and then takes a hard look at the remaining core of information, the result is an insightful look into what gives every appearance of being a real situation. In any event, I certainly wouldn't dismiss this man too lightly. We're going to hear a lot more from him before it's all over. Question 14. Jerome Clark reported in Fate magazine that I and Jamie Chandere made a trip to Washington, D.C. in anticipation of meeting a live alien, and were stood up in the process. Doesn't this imply that we were highly gullible individuals, and that the experience was probably just a practical joke on the part of the disinformation crowd? Answer: not at all. If you stop to think about it, considering what you now know of our project and its goals, we had a story no matter what happened. We made the trip because we simply couldn't lose. But then there's more to that experience than you know about. Once again, let me caution the hasty pudding crowd not to jump to conclusions until all the facts are in. Question 15. What are my plans for the future? Answer: I and my associates will continue our work and will continue to keep you informed of our results as circumstances warrant. What you've heard today is only part of a larger body of information. Question 16. Assuming they're interested, what can fellow ufologists do to support our continuing efforts? Answer: first of all, what we're doing takes a lot of time and a lot of money. We have the time. Money's not always available. The easiest thing you can do is to make some contribution to the effort. If not in cash, which by no means do we request, you might want to offer time, research services. You might have information which you feel we might be interested in. In any case, feel free to contact us at any time. 2 years ago in Washington, D.C., I stated we were looking for help. The response was damn few offers and a lot of rocks thrown in our direction. I can say to you now that at last inventory we had plenty of rocks. We still need the help. Those of you that still have rocks to throw, allow me to suggest that they might be put to better use by tossing them at the rumor mongers, or the disinformers, or the incompetents that are presently running rampant. Those people are the ones that are giving us a bad image. Question 17. What about the so-called Blue Book 13 report? Answer: I think it's best left up to those who are circulating this material to provide the proof of its authenticity. I remain unconvinced of it, but open-minded. Which brings me at last to the final section of this lengthy paper. It seems to me that it's high time I made my position clear about a few things. A lot of people seem to be very interested in knowing where Bill Moore stands. So here goes. Let me begin by stating that the positions presented here are entirely my own. All are based upon evidence obtained by me and by associates during the course of our project. Some of that has been made available already. Some is provided for the first time in this paper, and some remains to be released at a later, more appropriate time. As to the existence and depth of that which is yet to be released, you'll just have to take my word for the time being. To the best of my knowledge, everything here is true. Indeed, although I confess to having practiced an occasional deception now and again over the years in order to protect the integrity of what I was doing, our goal from the very beginning was to keep things as above board as possible. After all, ours is a search for answers, not an effort to create more mysteries. Position number one is that a highly advanced extraterrestrial civilization is visiting planet Earth and is actively manipulating our awareness of their presence here. Position number two. Elements of at least two of the U.S. government's intelligence agencies are aware of this, and both are presently conducting highly classified, ongoing research projects. I can tell you without reservation that at least one of these efforts, and possibly both, has access to electromagnetic, optical, and infrared signature data which, if released to the public, would provide proof positive that some UFOs represent somebody else's highly advanced technology. Unfortunately, I can't tell you more at this time. I wish I could. Those of you who find me competent and credible will take this as a revelation, which is as it should be. Those who hold other opinions will continue to throw rocks while loudly demanding at the same time that I deliver proof positive into their hands on a silver platter so that they can call it their own and claim credit for it. Patience, my friends. Position 3. U.S. government counterintelligence people have conducted an on-again, off-again campaign of deception and disinformation about the UFO phenomenon for more than 40 years. Those who have been responsible for such operations are highly placed individuals within at least two separate agencies, and there does seem to be a degree of cooperation between them. These operations involve a large number of people and are well organized. They also include the use of phony documents and the recruiting of informants who are able to provide information on the activities of people conducting UFO research or who have had UFO experiences. Why is this happening? My experience suggests 5 different reasons. A, the disinformation provides security cover for a real UFO project which exists at a very high level and is known only to an elite few. B, it is also useful as part of a security process designed to divert attention away from real but non-UFO related high-tech research and development projects. C, it is a manipulation by a group of highly placed and well-to-do individuals like the trilateralists who espouse a one-world philosophy and who are using the UFO phenomenon in an effort to bring about world unity in the face of an unknown threat from space. D, it provides a convenient way to train counterintelligence agents in the techniques of deception and disinformation. E, it is a manipulation by UFO aliens themselves as part of their plan to gradually make human society aware of their presence. My position is that the truth is better. Whether those people are witting or unwitting tools of this process, I do not know. The last thing the disinformation people expected, however, is that someone who knew of their activities with the Benowitz affair would pop up after so many years and burst their balloon. Position 4. We have been able to confirm that there is in fact a group known as MJ-12 which operates at the White House National Security Council level. To the best of my knowledge, this group still uses MJ-12 as the designator. The level of security around this group is such that we have not yet succeeded in establishing whether or not its functions are UFO related, or even precisely how long the group has existed. Along these same lines, none of our sources has indicated any knowledge whatsoever with terms such as Magi, Majesty, PI-40, Plato, Garnet, or a number of other terms currently being spread by certain elements. Position 5. There is, in fact, a Project Aquarius, possibly 2 of them. We have succeeded in obtaining considerable information about one such project in the 1971-73 time frame, and sketchy information about another, which may be a later extension of the first one, in the 76 to 85 time frame. This information includes contract and report numbers, as well as the names of several individuals who worked on the project. More details will be forthcoming later. Meanwhile, it here behooves UFO researchers to deluge the government with freedom of information requests for details of sensitive high-level projects. This simply alerts the powers that be that you are onto them, and thus makes it all the more difficult to obtain information through other channels. In the rush for me first in the UFO community, we are often our own worst enemies. Discretion is the better part of valor. Position 6. With respect to the controversial MJ-12 papers, these have now been examined by a number of question documents experts, and other research on them is continuing as well, as you've just heard from my friend Stanton. In the case of the Cutler-Twining memo found in the National Archives, I can state with reasonable certainty that it is an authentic document, and the best evidence indicates that someone planted it amidst the papers of Record Group 341, knowing that there was a strong chance we would find it there. With respect to the so-called Eisenhower briefing document, there is still no compelling reason to believe it is anything but authentic. On the other hand, its authenticity remains far from proved. So in the final analysis, the scale remains balanced by the weight of arguments on both sides. If it's the real thing, it's going to take extraordinary evidence to convince even some of the more liberal skeptics. If it's a hoax, it's extraordinarily well done. Much better than the sort of disinformation I encountered in connection with the Benowitz case. Of course, it still may be disinformation, but then again it may not. Either way, there's a major story here, and the controversy is far from over. If it's real, it speaks for itself. If it's disinformation, the equally important story of why needs to be told. As for the so-called Truman Executive Order of September 24, 1947, which is actually the final page of the portion of the Eisenhower document which we have, the analysts have come up with mixed results. They're not yet disproved. This document presents the weakest case of the three. We are working on a final report on this matter, which will include the results of typeface analysis and other processes. It's going to be a lengthy affair. Before leaving it, however, I would like to at least comment on what has emerged as the most controversial aspect of the MJ-12 document affair. that of the date format. There are a couple of points I would like to make. One, if the similarities between stylistic characteristics of the documents and my own writings are important, as some have claimed, then are not dissimilarities equally important? There are some, you know, even in the way the dates are written. Those who choose these, could it, I wonder, be prejudiced? Or does the word incompetence better describe it? Two, we are by no means convinced that the date format is as critical an issue as others would make it out to be. While the style is admittedly unusual, it is not without precedent. And that, of course, is the bottom line, isn't it? Three, to those of you who still harbor suspicions that I created the documents and am perpetrating a hoax, I say thank you for the compliment. To those of you who think it more likely that I am the innocent victim of an elaborate hoax, I concede that this remains a possibility which has not yet been entirely ruled out. Places who have connections with the National Security Council and the White House. Widespread publicity about the abduction phenomenon is an within the Union about exactly who is in control of the situation. Position 9. Ufology has been stumbling around for 30 years looking for answers. Unless something is done to reduce the petty bickering, the rumor-mongering, the name-calling, the ego-massaging, the power politics, and the personal vendettas which have been taking up our time, sapping our strength, and disgracing our image lately, I expect mainstream ufology will go right on stumbling for a long time to come. What is needed, I submit, is a society of professional ufologists which adheres to established research procedures and techniques, which maintains a rigorous set of ethics and standards, and which limits its membership to a few whose competence has been appropriately demonstrated. No matter what happens, however, I am committed to completing the process I have begun. I am presently working with a network of more than a dozen individuals, some of whom hold some very impressive credentials. We have been actively exploring the labyrinth of government UFO involvement, and we will continue to do so until we feel the task is complete or that we can go no further. Our group is euphemistically called the Aviary, and each individual uses a code name of a bird as an identifier. We will continue to provide the UFO community with data, and we will continue to proceed in a way which we feel best suits our purposes. A number of people have suggested to me recently that I should defend myself against various allegations and rumors which have been circulating lately. Well, folks, you've just heard the case for the defense. Now reach down inside of yourselves and wrench forth a judgment. I and my group of associates are going to find some answers, no matter what it takes and no matter how long it takes. We are out there digging, and we are going to continue to dig, either with the support of the UFO community or without it. Armchair researchers and hasty-pudding potshot plagiarist ufologists whose only goal is to make themselves look important at others' expense take note. Those of you who think we're doing a good job and want to be part of that process, please know that we welcome any support you feel you can offer, even if we've had personal differences between us in the past. Those who feel it's all a con game, or that it's all disinformation, can continue to throw all the rocks you want. We're going to go right on without you, just as we always have. In closing, I wish to state that the text you've just heard me read is copyrighted. As such, any use of printed, video, or audio reproductions of this material without permission is prohibited. And finally, this paper marks a radical change of position for me. In the past, I've always been very careful to qualify my statements about the possible extraterrestrial nature of UFOs so as to leave room for other explanations. All the evidence that my associates and I have accumulated to date, however, boils down to two inescapable conclusions. First, there is an extraterrestrial presence here on planet Earth. And second, a small number of individuals within our government know it, but remain undecided as to what to do about it. These two things represent the bottom line. From there, it's only a question of uncovering just how much of the rest of the UFO story is for real and how much of it is bullshit. That is precisely what we intend to do. So either climb aboard and hang on or get off the tracks. I apologize for having taken so long. If I've offended, that's unfortunate, but I have tried to be truthful with you. I had a lot to say, and it needed to be said. Thank you, good night, and farewell.
Steve, Tom, what's up, guys? Can you hear me?
I'm here.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I had to recycle myself. You know, this app, I swear, man. But, yeah, I don't know. If you want to start off the final discussion, yeah.
Well, there's a whole lot in there. I think that his explanations for why there had been a disinformation program, I think all of those could be true. I'm less inclined, now this is just me personally, but I'm less inclined to believe that the aliens are running it or heavily influencing it. But I think all the reasons that he gave, that they could all be true. He also indicated that MJ-12, as far as he could tell, did exist, but he didn't know if it had anything to do with UFOs. So it's possible that MJ-12 did or does exist and that it doesn't have anything to do with UFOs. But that's another mystery that, we researchers are trying to get to the bottom of.
I found that I didn't even know this about Bill Moore. He mentioned a group of people, what do you call it? Trilateralists. So like, I'm not sure if there was like a one world government conspiracy where they were attempting to use UFOs as a way of bringing unity. And I'm paraphrasing what he said, but like, I was just surprised to hear him actually say that, even though I know the popular conspiracy back in the late 80s, early 90s, and even, early 2000s. But that was kind of a shocker. I can't believe I missed that the first couple of times around.
It started with Reagan when he said that, when he made that comment, and I think 85, was it, Thomas? Do you know? Or Steve? When he made that comment at the UN, I think, about, if our differences, how they would be settled real quickly if we had a threat from, an extraterrestrial civilization coming to invade us.
Yeah, he did make those remarks. And according to Richard Doty, Richard Doty's claim is that Reagan was very concerned about UFOs, had been briefed on it, and that he was a believer. He had had his own UFO sighting himself.
Was that the Sandus lab briefing that supposedly happened? Right? All right, no, not Sandus, but Sandia, where he got briefed on like some type of navigational technology that was recovered from a crash site. Was that the alleged briefing that he got, Thomas, or was it something greater?
Well, what I've heard is that he was briefed at Camp David. It was one of those type things, where the William Casey from the CIA and a couple of other people came in there and briefed him. But that's just really rumor at this point. Now, Richard Doty again has said there is a document in the Reagan Presidential Library that points to that briefing, even though it doesn't explicitly mention it.
Yeah, Reagan made that comment in a few speeches around that time, how quickly our differences would, evaporate if we faced a threat from outside this world. And, I think a lot of that is blown out of proportion, just my own opinion. But, Star Wars, last third installment of the Star Wars movie had just came out. E.T. was popular, and Reagan was very well known for, kind of using pop culture and, things that were popular at the time to help make his points. And it seemed like that was kind of what he was doing in the few speeches that he mentioned that in at the time, in my opinion.
There's also another interesting footnote to pivot where Moore stated in that speech, think it's a bit earlier about like how Paul Benowitz is trying to decode alleged alien transmissions and communications. And quote, I had a lengthy discussion about this matter with the late Dr. Alan Hynek, but also independently examined Paul's program. End quote. Now I have it on pretty good authority that, or at least a few people that you would think are authorities on the subject, say that Paul Allen Hynek actually delivered that computer to Benowitz. So that's an interesting thing, and I mean, I'm pretty sure Jack Valet believes that. There's a couple others that I know that for sure have stated that, and it is a point of contention amongst some researchers. But I kind of tend to believe that Hynek did deliver that, and I don't know. I just found that interesting, that quote right there.
Doty's version is that Hynek supplied a computer screen, like a computer monitor, but he didn't actually provide the actual computer.
Oh, that's interesting. So there's corroboration
Wait,
on the board that there was involvement with Hynek. He might have not even.
I have
to be honest.
I have a quote from Doty right now, where he says that, he gave him, quote unquote, yes, he gave him a crude computer system, and the program Nepal was an amateur program, and he, I lost my spot, damn it. And he gave them, okay, hold on, was an amateur program, and he had people in his lab that were actually, something for computer programmers and back ran. Okay, yeah, I mean, this transcript kind of, it's screwed up. So, but yeah, that's, in fact, I'll just find the clip. Hold on.
That's, and that's a really good point because, Doty has in past, if you go back to interviews, in past years, he did say that he gave him, that Hynek allegedly gave Benowitz a computer screen. So like a lot of things, it seems like Doty's story is kind of evolving. But also as far as that goes, Hynek, giving him a computer or computer screen, as far as I know, that sources completely back to Doty, that story. And maybe Tom has more information on that, but as far as I know, that pretty much sources back to him, which is a problem, obviously.
Yeah,
Well, more.
Could you mind if I butt in here real quick?
Sure. Go ahead.
I was reading also Pi, thanks for letting me speak. I was reading a Project Beta recently, and I'm pretty sure this was sourced to Moore, actually.
Yeah, Moore's story was that he had lunch with Alan Hynek, and Alan Hynek told him, Bill Moore, that Alan Hynek, provided Benowitz with a computer.
Right, after a few beers or something.
So our two sources are Rick Doty and Bill Moore. I just want to be clear about the shaky ground and foundation that this claim.
Well,
is based
Jack
on,
Valet as well.
Also shaky ground, I'd argue.
So I just checked in my Jacques Vallée transcript. It's 1,800 pages. It's every Jacques Vallée interview that is on the internet, and he only mentions Paul Benowitz once, and and it was nothing about the Paul Hynek stuff. So I think unless there's another source on that, I think maybe that may be a little bit of.
It's what he says.
I mean, where's this? I mean, when did he say this? Like, as I'm saying, like, what's the source for Jacques Vallée saying it? Because he didn't mention it once in, thousands or probably hundreds of hours of interviews going back to the 70s.
The only source I is.
Do you have a source for that?
Because it's somebody I know that has personal contact with him, and I've seen it.
Okay, so we need to get to waterboarding. Somebody, we need to get this information out.
Well,
right?
It's interesting too because Moore, I believe, also named Hynek and Jacques Vallée as government assets on a was it Paracast? It was on a podcast with Don Ecker. I'm not sure if it was like off the record or not, but Don Ecker was later on the record talking about that conversation, how he specifically named those two. So I don't know what Moore's opinion was of Jacques Vallée, but I'm willing to bet that it wasn't as high as everybody else's.
Well, can't the government asset be willing or an unwilling one?
That's a good point, but with the context of the conversation, I don't think that was the case.
A while ago, and the Dust Jacket says that Bill Moore was a playwright. So if anybody ever comes across any Bill Moore plays, I would love to read them.
What? Who said that?
It's on the Dust Jacket for the Roswell incident.
For the what? I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
It's on the Dust Jacket for the Roswell incident. It's in his author bio.
Are you sure they weren't talking about Berlitz?
Nope, it was definitely Bill Moore.
Okay, I've got a copy of it right here. I'm going to check.
It's the orange one, right? It'll be on the back flap at the bottom.
I am glitching really hard. Like, we almost lost the space a couple of times, so, I mean, yeah. Like I
Yeah,
keep fading in and out, so I'm just going to try to keep the space like from closing down. So, yeah.
that's correct. It does say, this is what it says on the back jacket. William L. Moore, author of the Philadelphia Experiment, in consultation with Charles Berlitz, is a writer, a playwright, and an investigator of the unexplained. His research on the Roswell incident brought him face to face with those involved in the event. Moore lives in Arizona with his wife and 4 children. So that's correct. It does say that. And I didn't notice that and had never really heard that before. Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
So I was just going through some of my notes that I've kept of various like Bill Moore interviews and stuff, and he did go on an interview with Don Ecker in 1992. I forget which show it was, but he said that and of course, just like this speech that he gave, he said, more is to come. I'll be coming out with more later, which he never did. He never came out with more. He never named the Falcon. All this stuff just remained hanging in the air, and it still does today. But anyway, when Moore was on with Don Ecker, he said that Hynek was involved with the Benowitz affair, and that he had documents or contracts that Hynek signed with the government. Again, like these are all just like anecdotal claims, and it doesn't surprise me that Jack Valet and Ellen Hynek, 2 of the most visible, well-known people involved with UFOs at the time, that he would cite them as being government ops. It doesn't surprise me, but it doesn't mean that there's a whole lot of weight to that. Just like the Hynek story with the computer, which has changed a lot and just doesn't seem to even fit with a lot of the technology at the time and stuff. And even though Doty had said, well, the government gave him this computer or this computer screen, he's like, the alien showed up and like we didn't have anything to do with that. Like, he's still like saying, well, although they gave him this computer, the alien that showed up was real. It wasn't part of a disinfo op. You know what I mean?
Wait, does he really still say that?
Well,
Still, I don't know. I don't listen to Doty much these days, but I've listened to most of his big interviews over the last 15 years or so. I can't say I listened to much that he said on Spaces the past year or two.
Well, Steve,
yeah, well, I mean,
go ahead, Greta.
one thing I just want to say about Bill Moore is that Bill Moore, okay, I mean, I know you guys are talking about Doty, but, just kind of, before I forget really, Bill Moore also claimed that Harry Rositzky, at one time he said that was Falcon. And just to get some background, like I've done a lot of research on on Harry Rositzky. He was a big CIA legend, like a legendary anti-Soviet communist type of like intelligence figure. But saying that Harry Rositzky, hey Steve, you got a hot mic.
Grider, you cut out. Well, while he gets his mic back, I don't think he outright said it was Harry Rositzky. I think the legend goes, Bishop kept asking him and kept coming up with names, like who could it be? And he finally landed on Harry Rositzky as one of the names. And that's when Bill Moore finally acknowledged, like, yeah, that's him. And that was it. Like, that was the extent of the conversation. Nothing else was really added to it. And Greg Bishop had to go back, make sure he remembered the name, because I think they were on some sort of nature walk. And then, that's how that whole story of Harry Rositzky being Falcon came to be. And then Greg Bishop wrote a bunch of articles on it, had a couple of podcasts about it, and it was really interesting. We had a space about, debating whether that could be him or could not be him. I know Richard Helms is also up for that role as well. Some people still believe that it was Doty himself, and it's still not set in stone, though I am kind of in the Harry Rositzky camp.
What's the last thing that you guys heard before I got kicked?
You were doing a lot of research.
You guys remember?
Almost nothing.
Almost nothing.
Well,
All right.
they both could be true.
I mean, saying that Harry Rositzky, the thing to understand about Harry Rositzky is that he was like a larger than life anti-communist media, like he was a media personality at that point in the 80s. All right. Harry Rositzky was like a CIA celebrity almost, like you could think of him like that. He was well known, and saying that, like Bill Moore saying that Harry Rositzky was Falcon would be like would be like us having a modern day aviary that we're trying to figure out who, and then me telling you that it's James Bond. Like that's that telling you with a straight face that James Bond is like the arch villain. That granted it's not a perfect analogy, but it's kind of the same. Saying that Harry Rositzky is Falcon. Like I almost think that Bill Moore just wanted Greg Bishop to shut up and stop bothering him, which that's the way that Greg Bishop characterizes it, as like he bothered more until eventually he said Harry Rositzky just to make him be quiet. And I bet my life on the, okay, I'm not going to bet my life. I would bet a lot lot. Like I would bet, everything but my life that, it wasn't Harry Rositzky. I mean, it's so fantastical to imagine that that would be possible.
Well, it
But I
sounds to
could be
me like
wrong.
it sounds to me like Bill has a tendency to throw out accusations or implications that certain people are, government agents. So I caught what he was saying about Philip Glass, for example, and his disbelief that anyone would spend 20 years dedicated to studying a subject that they thought nothing of it unless they were possibly a government agent. It seems like he's the kind of person who's very casual to throw out certain accusations like that. And based on what you guys are saying, it wouldn't surprise me that that's probably what he was doing with Valet as well.
Well, Kraft, the flip side of that.
Haven't we heard that before though? Like think about it. Like think about, is there let's say like a modern figure that's pushing a disinformation movement that we can think of maybe? Just imagine one. I'm not gonna, just imagine one. And do they attack, debunkers? Do they constantly accuse people of being disinformation agents? Debunkers make up sham opposition to kind of discredit and to kind of bolster their own standing. I mean, I'm thinking of like, I don't know, like an airplane that went to, disappeared. Like, I don't know. It's, the playbook is the same. It, just because the years change doesn't mean that like, the ability to manipulate people, that it gets like more advanced, it's like, it's still the basic principles of lying and, controlling people, and it's, that authoritarian influence.
Right, but the flip
is
side,
I think what Bill Moore was trying to cultivate.
But the flip side of that is that there has been proven interference by, we can go to Heineck, for instance, from the Air Force. He wasn't necessarily going after ufologists, but he was debunking cases rather egregiously, and he later came out and kind of did a 180. So there's a precedent for that there. By the way,
yes, but never the ones that are accused of it.
That doesn't.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, just because one person does something doesn't mean that everybody.
I'm not. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, this isn't. It's not like a legal standard though. We're talking about, okay.
By the way,
and like to Grader's point.
I don't know if you saw the DM.
Who?
Panda.
And to Grader's point,
Thomas, do you see any requests? Tom, like, do you?
He said Panda. And to Grader's point, something that struck me about the speech is it's evergreen. You could give the same exact speech today, and all of it would be just as relevant. The playbook is the same. I mean, instead of Philip Glass back then, today it would be Mick West. And how many times do we constantly hear, who's paying you? Someone's funding you. You can't possibly be doing this out of your own personal interest. It's exactly the same 30 years later.
I don't know if you guys saw it, but I posted under the thing about, I posted to tag some people in it. I scanned the Bill Moore speech if you want it in print. It was in back-to-back issues of the MUFON Journal in late 89. And then there's also a addendum that Moore wrote in an issue of Focus to it, which I have also scanned, but I can't post that one because I understand Moore's pretty litigious. So if you want to read it, you can DM me or something.
Yeah, that whole copyright thing at the end, that whole, like a thread of copy, like where he copyrighted, everything that he was talking about. I mean, the guy I don't like Bill Moore. I don't care if he, discovered, I just don't care about how good of a researcher he is. I mean, he's clearly not that good because he spent a decade disinforming people with like his work, right? So like, I don't know. He's a good researcher. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that. Like, I don't buy it. I think Bill Moore's a scumbag. I think Bill Moore I'm going to take it a step further. Now we're going to be the UFO speculation group for a moment. I think maybe he had a hand in like him and Shandera may possibly have like manufactured a lot of those MJ-12 documents. I think there's some fucking afoot, and I think Bill Moore. I mean, that's why
I think they did. I think I confirmed that they almost confirmed.
I just confirmed it right now.
Time,
yeah.
This is also I've been going to push back a little bit. Very uncharted territory in a way for these guys. More, I think all the vitriol all the venom that was sent his way at the time was by ufologists was largely because they were all jealous that he got to be the special boy and got to be on the inside. I also think that Stanton Friedman doesn't get nearly enough shit for almost assuredly working in private Doty behind his back. Like, he was the one who pointed Moore and Shandera to that USAF archive that had just opened where they found that uncatalogued memo after all those postcards and shit.
Dude, who are you? Like, came out of nowhere, dude. All this knowledge, where have you been, man? Like, welcome home, dude. Yeah, dude. Like, you need to become a regular speaker. I mean, you're pulling out all this knowledge. Like, thanks for stopping in, man.
My name's Bradley. I'm not gonna promote the podcast I've been on or whatever, but
promote the podcast. I want to promote it. Yeah, dude. We like to promote.
Bro. I interviewed Mark Pilkington in January.
What's the name of your podcast?
I don't have one. I just guessed on them. The one that I go on frequently is called Ghost Stories for the End of the World, and I interviewed Mark Pilkington at the beginning of the year.
Awesome. Yeah, dude. Hey, we love to, like, dude, if you're doing something for the community and you're providing value, then like we're all for that, dude. Like, not this hate on people that be successful, or like we don't hate on other people's success here in this, group. Well, I mean, maybe one person does, but most of us, we like to see others succeed, So yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
By the way, I shared up in the nest some links to those interviews that Bill Moore did with Greg Bishop, Radio Mysterioso in the 2000s, and they were, the last really interviews that Moore did. But just since we were talking about him, I threw it up in there. People wanted to go back and listen to him recount, about trying to find out who Falcon was and whatnot.
So why did he kind of oh, go ahead, Steve.
Falcon, real quick. Oh, no, sorry. And I just wanted to say, because somebody mentioned it earlier, maybe both are true. Like, clearly, I think it's almost certain, right, that Rick Doty is the Falcon in silhouette that was seen on UFO Cover Up Live. So, it really is the case, in my opinion, that, both Rick Doty and possibly someone else were the Falcon. But Rick Doty absolutely was the Falcon, at least in that video interview.
Why did Moore kind of fade away after the speech in the intervening years? Because it sounded from the speech that he still had quite a few big projects that he was working on, and he clearly got a pretty good clap at the end. It wasn't nearly as vitriolic as the short clips that we tend to portray it as. What was his reason for kind of slowly disappearing?
He got chased out of the casino, dude. Dude, he like literally went and hopped on an airplane and got out of Vegas. Like, he was not welcome, dude. People hated him for this. Like, did you hear the people like talking about how they were yelling about getting a fire hose?
But of course, there were a couple hecklers at the in the middle, but it was quite a clap at the end.
I mean,
okay, but Bill,
yeah, he obviously attacked a lot of people there, like pretty much the whole gamut of almost everybody. Kind of came at in that speech, but yeah, it gets repeated a lot that Moore, disappeared from the topic after that. He wasn't. He was around for many years, a solid 10 years. You can see he was on Coast to Coast, but he was never as popular as he was in the 80s. And Tom might have more information on maybe the exact whys and behind the scenes stuff, but the topic really moved into like an abduction kind of phase in the 90s, and that may have had a lot to do with it because Moore wasn't, involved with that. But also, like, Doty was gone, and he had kind of, at the point that he gave his speech, Doty was already gone. So his inside access was kind of eliminated, at least from that aspect. But he certainly tried to remain in the topic for many years. But that speech really alienated him in a lot of ways, definitely.
Yeah, Moore continued to work. He published the MJ-12 documents and analytical report, I think in 1990 or 1991, and he continued to publish his Focus newsletter into 1993. And then sometime in the second half of the 90s, I think he dropped out, never to return. And he wrote a book about the Mormon Church. And according to Richard Doty, he couldn't get it published because the Mormon Church objected, and I think they paid him off to not publish it.
That's such a shame. I would love to read that.
I would love to get paid off not to publish. Like, dude. One thing I want to say, all right, so for next, like, I'm just going to throw this out. We can continue the conversation, of course, but, for next week's, like, for next Sunday's space, I think, myself, Thomas, and, UFO Meme Face are going to each pick something that we want to listen to, and then we're going to do a poll and let you guys vote on, like, what we do the space on. Yeah, and then maybe have a fourth option, that's, it's like, we, do something like draw out of a hat, and everybody can submit like their own, what they want to hear if the choices that we pick aren't up to, the standard that you guys want.
Well,
so,
I would just offer that.
Yeah, so
maybe we focus it around a certain subject. Since we do have Thomas Whitmore here, he is like kind of the leading authority on the MJ-12 documents. So like, and it's such a deep rabbit hole to go into, but maybe we can start with something related to that. So at least get the conversation going.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll each pick one like that has to do with MJ-12. We'll each pick either a podcast or a lecture or
didn't
a
someone
speech
just
or something
die
like that.
related to those? That might be worth listening to.
2 people died recently. Bob Wood, who's very pro MJ-12, he just died a few weeks ago. He was well in his.
Is that the son or the son or the father? Is Bob Wood?
The father. The father is.
What's
Bob.
the son doing?
Only, yeah.
Is the son still around?
Yeah, he's still around, and I'm actually going to be on a space with him in this month with John Strader. His name is Ryan Wood.
Oh,
yeah,
I kind of.
That'll be nice. Be cool.
Then the other person that died was Bob Collins, who was Condor in the UFO Cover-Up Live.
Yeah, Air Force Intelligence Lieutenant Colonel. Yep.
So going back to our original title, The Loss of the Age of Innocence, I guess this was I mean, it sounds like people have been accusing Bill Moore for a little bit before this speech, about being tied to some sort of government agency and spreading disinformation. But like now, after this speech, after hearing that a lot of the Bennett stuff was complete misinformation, and not only that, he was used, but also Linda Moulton Howell was spreading misinformation that she herself either did not know or refused to accept was misinformation when confronted with it. Heading into the 90s, ufology, I don't know, I wasn't around at that time, but I wonder what the repercussions were around the ufology circles after hearing something like this, because now you have the intelligence agency and ufology married at the hip, basically, and there's no going back. Once you draw that line, that's just like, you can't go back. You can't go back to that wide-eyed, oh my God, is this true? Is this not? Now you have to wonder, what am I reading? Is it true? Is it related to some sort of intelligence operation or counterintelligence? I don't know. I think going after that, it's a pretty steep road. But I wonder, Thomas, like, what was it afterwards?
Yeah, it was a distinct change, from the 80s, because before the 80s, the only phony documents that floated around was an occasional hoax, and it was very limited. And then alleged government documents really took off during the 1980s, and I used to say the MJ-12 documents were like a hydrogen bomb being dropped on the UFO community, but it was really, I think, Bill Moore's speech, this what we listened to tonight, was the hydrogen bomb that dropped on the UFO community. And I think the effect has been that now people see disinformation behind every tree. And if you listen to the people on Twitter and listen to Spaces, everything is a psyop, okay? And I just think people have gone crazy with that. Now, it's a completely different world now with social media than it was in the 80s. In the 80s, people had to use typewriters, and they were just beginning to use word processors. Now we have social media, and if any intelligence agency wants to drop some meme on the UFO community, it's incredibly easy to do so. Just get it spreading around in social media. But at the same time, I don't think we should be looking at everything as disinformation or a psyop.
Thomas, can I
That
piggyback
sounds
off
like
that
something
question?
a PSYOP agent would say. I don't know.
So I wanted to piggyback off that question because that speech, there's so many invaluable lessons that are timeless. And obviously I have a biased view here. I don't see that the community learned any of the lessons he was trying to get.
It's exactly right. I totally agree.
And I wanted to know from Thomas's perspective, do you think the community 30 years later has still really taken on the lessons of that speech?
Well, like I said before, Moore, the whole thrust of his investigation was to try to get to the bottom of the truth about the U.S. government's involvement in UFOs. And what he found, or what he believed, was that the U.S. government had been involved deeply on a very secret level. Now, at the same time, he was blaming the UFO community and criticizing it, for not being on the right track. And how can you be on the right track if you don't have access to information? And if the government is withholding information from the UFO community, I don't see how you can blame the UFO community for being rudderless and not knowing which direction to go. That's my take on it.
Well, can I push back on that? Because there was a section in which he was criticizing the community on the basis of the lack of standards, the lack of evidential epistemic standards, the lack of credentials, the lack of uniformity in terms of gathering eyewitness testimony, how to gather that testimony, just everything that I think I still see in the community he was talking about back then, and presumably that was something that he had observed for many years prior. Do you think in those cases, it's not even a case of it's rudderless because they don't have access to information. It's also rudderless because the information that they do have, what they do with it is of such poor quality and of such low rigor that even if they had access to high quality information, you would not be able to get any good, reliable conclusions from it. Because, for example, eyewitness testimony, how do you gather eyewitness testimony? What kind of questions do you ask eyewitnesses so as to not contaminate their testimony? How quickly do you get that testimony? What do you do when there's conflicting reports? All of these things are things that it doesn't matter what the government gives us. These are things that you can set a standard for your field yourself, regardless of what the government is giving you, because we all have access to eyewitness testimony in the UFO community. He is criticizing criticizing what the ufology world is doing with the very things that they claim to be investigating in the first place, regardless of how much the government gives us. And I don't see any improvement 30 years later. Do you?
I just sent Red the section of the speech you're talking about in his DM, so hopefully he can post it in the nest. It's like you said, it's timeless. It's like it's perfect. Like there's been no change. Like ever since they drove more out with pitchforks and torches, like they decided that it's going to be like that forever.
Well, there has been one change, right, which is a pretty significant change in that the avatars of the people that were finding the truth, like these, researchers, steeped in academia, they've kind of been switched out. Like I don't see too many of those anymore, and I do see a lot of people with direct ties to either intelligence community or to the government itself. Like Jim Semivan and what's the other guy's name? The guy with the whatever. Like they're all kind of the ones now that are at the forefront of this. So like that is, I think, a
It's
fairly.
actually worse, huh?
Let him finish, Red.
Well, I was finished. I forgot the guy's name, but like I do see a drastic change in that where the roles have been reversed. Where again, like you see somebody like Bill Moore get booed for talking about his connections to a possible government intelligence agent or someone from the AFOSI. Whereas now I think people are kind of applauded, or even it's like, well, who is this guy? Is he even related to the government at all? How can we trust him? Like it's been a complete 180 in the people that we look to for answers. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. You can all you can cast your own judgment on that, right? Because, you can argue, oh, well, they're closer to the machine, blah, blah, blah. Well, but that was also Bill Moore's excuse too, right? I wanted to be closer to the machine in order to get to the answer. So it's just noticing a change for sure.
Yeah, and I think we can all observe just the prevalence of intelligence and former intelligence community members in this community, and they're treated with open arms. And that observation is a keen one. Back then, it was it would be something that would tarnish your reputation if you were in any way associated with them. But now it's almost like the credentials are taken at face value and are taken as weighty as evidence itself. But again, that doesn't go back to my question. He was criticizing the lack of rigor and standards in ufology across the board. Has any of that changed whatsoever in 30 years?
No is the answer. No is the answer.
Well, I wanted the answer from Thomas.
I think we have a lot of the same problems, but the ufology has never had establishment acceptance. And I think the easy route to take is to blame the people in the UFO community. And I don't see it that way. There are problems inherent in UFO investigation. You don't know when you're going to see a UFO. You don't know where. If you want to study lions, you can go to where lions live and you can study them. You can't do that with UFOs. And because the establishment science, establishment academia doesn't want to have anything to do with it, they won't go in and apply the kind of rigor that Bill Moore wanted, or that you want, or that any of us want. And there are just some structural built-in problems with UFO question.
One thing to keep in mind too about Bill Moore is that he was recruited out of high school. Like he did like an internship program at the CIA. Like the guy, I mean, he didn't get hired by them obviously, but he was like, he was a part of like a CIA like summer camp program. So I mean, like the guy, I don't know, like was he in the pocket of other intelligence? I mean, it's according to some, yes, but he at the very least, yeah, he was affiliated with the CIA for a summer. And so make of that what you mean, make of that what you will.
And I'd like to know where you got,
Charles Berlitz, who he did his first book with, had the Berlitz Language School and was a pretty clear intel community asset. You know what I mean? And I guess Moore knew Russian apparently and had some correspondences with people in Russia. So in the guise of the Cold War through that lens, yeah, you can see some of those connections. But it's funny, and I just feel like I just want to put my opinion out there for Bill Moore, because I definitely agree that the things that he highlighted are just worse today. And you guys already covered, the government and intel community members pretty much being the apex of UFO celebrity or UFO insider and having immediate acceptance. But a lot of the stuff that Moore pointed out, he didn't live himself. It was a lot of finger pointing disappointing, in my opinion, and a lot of trying to paint himself in a good light, and it just felt like that there was a lot of just like deflection going on, and you can see where the message could be lost for a lot of reasons. Not that what he didn't have to say in some areas was really valid, but you know, it would kind of be like hearing that same message again from like Jeremy Corbell or something. You know, like it would just kind of, there would be
Jeremy
so much
Corbell wasn't in.
hollowness. And go ahead.
I'd say it's more akin to more like an Elizondo, right? Well, yeah, I guess but with Charles Berlitz,
sure,
he
or
was
somebody
Army
that, like,
intelligence.
directly-
Charles Berlitz was Army intelligence for 15 years, like close to 15 years. So I think maybe that could be compared to Elizondo, something like that, right? And then you're right about Moore would be more like, I don't know, like not even a Corbell, because Corbell doesn't really do anything approaching like legitimate, casework, right?
Yeah,
I think Bill Moore did some legitimate.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I consider Moore to Corbell to be like a modern day Bill Moore. Like he has connections allegedly on the inside that feed him information, and he's getting these stories that he's not really doing research on, presenting to us. So I do see a lot of parallels with Moore. Like I'm not trying to make a clear
Steve.
one.
No. Hey, so Corbell has been caught, and I know because I hate to toot my own horn, but like I caught him, okay, lying about the source of information for 29 Palms, where he was claiming that he had a source that, like various sources, more than one, that, gave him the information about there being a, sighting at 29 Palms. There was a triangle sighting. He claims that, I got a tip, was exactly what he said. I got a tip, said it, close to 50 times, all right, throughout all these interviews. I got a tip. Well, I uncovered about, it was like 3 weeks ago, I uncovered where that's not true at all. He didn't get a tip. He actually found this guy, this Marine who posted the video on Facebook, found him within 8 hours of the Marine posting it overnight on a Wednesday night, on a weekday night, overnight. All right. So this kid posted it, this guy who was at 29 Palms, and he posted this to Facebook at like 9 p.m. at night, and Jeremy Corbell had DM'd this kid by 6 a.m. the next morning. So there was no tip. It's like Corbell lies about the sources of his information, at least with the 29 Palms. And I think it's more than likely that he doesn't have any inside information. Because he clearly lied about it, and he's trying to
get a funnel to the UPTF videos.
Again, Bill Moore peddled disinformation. Again, I'm not trying to like draw a 1-to-1 ratio. Like, I don't know, maybe James Fox would be a better example. Like, again, I was just using him as an example. It would be like one of these people who have been presenting UFO information for us at a high level for many, many years, coming forth and saying these things. And I'm just kind of, drawing that comparison,
So, Steve, it sounds to me like you're saying it sounds disingenuous.
I think the best comparison would literally be George Knapp, his partner.
Yeah, so, Steve, are you saying, it seems to me like what you're saying is it's akin to a Corbell calling for higher rigor and standards in the community, given his history. Is that what you're saying? It's a bit disingenuous to call for higher standards when you have a track record of not living up to those standards yourself, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Wait, hold on, Steve. Wait, were you kind of saying that maybe like in the way that Moore was like a conduit for disinformation? Are you saying that Corbell may be a conduit for disinformation in the same, like he may have his own Doty that's feeding him these videos? Is that what you were kind of alluding to?
Again, I'm not.
Okay. I thought you were saying
representations of each other. Like there's parallels that can be drawn between them. I was just using Corbell as another famous person today, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, okay, well then I agree. That's absolutely I just always look at Corbell as like a businessman.
He could also be a useful.
Yeah, and I mean, I look at Bill Moore as a businessman.
Again, he is. Yeah,
a writer.
He's at least half of that. Yeah,
he sold everything that he put out, even the speech. He had to buy it from him.
Corbell is a lifelong fraud, though. Like he just goes from grip to grip. Like he just has settled on this one as of late, and it works for him. The George Knapp partnership is just fascinating. It's crazy.
I hear a lot of
they're
parallels
both
here.
Questionable.
There's also a lot of parallels here. Moore's calls for higher standards to Elizondo's paper on the death of ufology, also calling for more rigor. It's really interesting to see 30 years later, similar peddlers of misinformation calling for the same thing while, having a proven track record of not living up to those standards, going back to Steve's point.
I mean, I don't know.
all right. So, like, I know it's very anti-Moore here, but I still am under the belief that he didn't have to come out and say what he could have very well continued his quote great,
I'm totally with
right?
you. I think that it was a lot of what we know now about UFO disinformation is because he did this, which I think
Exactly.
is
So,
pretty
like, he set a
courageous.
landmark with that speech, and again, like, he could have just continued on his merry way doing what he was doing and still been the star of ufology as he was back then. So, like, I think some of
But
the
Why
he
did he do
couldn't
it though?
have. He already
a little
had
unfair.
problems building.
No,
That
no.
was the
Why did he
issue.
do that though?
Yeah,
What was the
and I just want to
motivation for him
say,
coming out? Has that ever been discussed or asked? Why did he come out? Did he just decide to come out one day? What, he had like a stroke of morality? Like, come on now. Like, I think there's gotta be a bigger reason, right? Why did he come clean?
right. And even if he
Well,
was
why
to
did he go
tell me
dark?
the reason as to why he did that, I don't know if I would even believe him. But it's just to make the point, like, he was already coming under fire for these things. He was already having to deflect, the slings and arrows from researchers who were scrutinizing him, just not with his relationship with Richard Doty, who was already out in the community and who was being speculated on. But the MJ12 documents that had come out just, a year or two before were coming under fire. A lot of things he was already deflecting a lot at the time. And again, I saw this as a way for him to try and gain the upper hand, to try and do some revisionism or just paint himself in a different light, or to, give explanations or excuses for things that were already going on in the community, things that were already being whispered about.
Okay, so here's why I'd push back on that a little bit, and it's because one, like we were talking about earlier, the beginning of his speech where he talks about the standards of ufology and everything, is like there's one section of it that it's just gas. It's so good, and then he goes on to
Thomas, did you mean to mute the space?
Accident.
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
did I
You can go on and
cut
continue,
out?
BWP.
What I was saying was that, like, I don't know. I've always read Moore's speech and conduct as being very, like, yeah, he did bad shit. I'm not gonna like contest that at all. But he had to make a choice. He's kind of pioneering this. He didn't have anybody to go on. Like, we've had hindsight to go on now. We know that he did the wrong thing. But I don't think he knew that he was doing the wrong thing. But the beginning of his speech where he talks about standards of ufology and all these things, and basically called out everybody in the room, saying that, like, what they're doing is pretty shitty and they should, like, do some self-reflection. Then going into what he did with collaborating with AFOSI and whatnot, and then ending with him still believing, like, genuinely believing that there was an alien presence on Earth, and that a lot of the shit that he was told was genuinely real. I think then disappearing from the field.
Again, he
I just
didn't
don't see
disappear.
it
He
as
was around
being.
for like a decade after, and
Well, he's around for a few years, yeah.
No, he was around for like a good decade. Like, and I don't know what his heart was. I don't know what maybe he had this whole moral thing, and he felt bad about Benowitz, and he came forward. Maybe, or maybe that's an element of it. I'm not saying that it's not, but I certainly see that Bill Moore was trying to get ahead of a problem, to try and paint himself in a light, and he wasn't talking about things that were totally unknown. He didn't break this stuff wide open. It was already known, and people were already talking about it. And again,
Okay, well then it's super easy for him to own it. Like,
yeah, very easy. And this stuff was all really easy targets. All the stuff that he said, although I agree with it about the evidence standards and whatnot in the community, all things that many skeptics had been talking about for decades, all the time. And many of their critiques of him and his work, these are the exact things that these researchers said. The very work that he continues.
It's super easy to come clean with something after it's already over.
Red Panda.
Yeah, and I just have a hard time accepting the very basic premise of Moore's alleged quid pro quo with Doty, specifically that Moore would actually believe that he'd been given real information and evidence of a U.S. government cover-up. I just can't buy that he was that naive, and these are just opinions that we're going with here. But especially considering that Moore was given full view of the depths of Doty's deception from day one against Paul Benowitz, yet he would just trust him on his own with the information that he was being given. And these are just like side things. But as far as the speech goes, although there's a lot of great elements to it, as time has gone on and I've heard the speech more and I've learned more about Moore's past, a lot of Moores in there. But it definitely isn't just this altruistic moment that he had. There's a lot of ego and there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of defensiveness. And the guy was trying to salvage what for him was his only career at that time now for years.
Well, real quick, mate. So like one of the, I think something that we might not be hitting on as part of the motivations. I mean, he made a Faustian bargain with Doty and AFOSI, right? So he in essence was promised the goods. Like he was going to get UFO material that the public has never seen straight from the government, right? That he was going to, to assume at least some of it would be true. So he himself, I'm sure, was looking for the smoking gun and knew what he was doing was wrong, but he thought in the pursuit of truth that that this was a necessary evil he had to take. So by the time that speech rolled around, he might have felt used. And that's something that we're not touching on. He might have felt like used by these people because almost certainly everything he had received from them was complete garbage. Like nothing panned out. None of the secret insider stuff that he was supposed to have gotten ever panned out. It was all complete garbage. So by the time he got up there, I mean, I'm sure he had a bone to pick with the fact that like, oh my God, like they used me. Fuck these people. And maybe, when he's talking about the standards of evidence and like, we need to have more rigor when we're looking over these things, he might have been talking to himself as well. It's like because he got played. He didn't do his own due diligence in some regard, and this is what happened. So all of this might have just been kind of like a spurned lover kind of a thing. I'm sure there's other parts of it, but I just have to assume that like he's genuine when he does say that the standards do have to come up and that we're all playing each other.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Dude, it's really easy for him to say that. I'm sorry, guys. I've never used the mute button before, but I got to use it now because I know everybody got like 4 people trying to. It's really easy for him to say that, and then we're going to go to Panda because he had his hand up. It's really easy for him to be holier than thou and come clean after everything's already done, right? Bill Moore was used. What the hell did he do to Benowitz? He used Benowitz like a $3 whore, like just ran him ragged. Didn't give a shit about anything. And now that Bill Moore got like used up and tossed out with the trash by Doty, now he's a victim. I don't buy any of that, man. I don't buy any. I don't care what happened. Like Bill Moore was doing damage to so many lives, man. So many people, literal, like real damage, real tangible damage that he did to people's lives. And then all of a sudden he's the victim because he didn't get his fucking payout. Like fuck him. Fuck Bill Moore. All right, Panda.
I forgot what I was going to say, but I will say he does have one of the most iconic hairstyles in all of ufology, in my opinion. The beard bowl cut combo. And I'm also with Steve on this. I feel like when I listened back to this a few years ago, it seemed more altruistic, and now it kind of seems like arrogant. And then also the copyright thing at the end was pretty funny, but it's funny that he's like, I'm better than all of you here, even though I was duped for 10 years, but I know I'm not duped now. It's just an interesting dynamic.
But that's such a silly complaint to have, because by his own admission, he was trying to dupe them by pretending to be a useful idiot. So on what basis could he possibly have to feign a moral injury of nothing he got panning out, considering he himself, by his own admission, was trying to play them as a useful idiot?
I'm trying to get, I've talked to Mark Wilkington quite a bit, and I asked if he'd ever talked to Moore, and he said no, he only talks through Greg Bishop now. I've been thinking about contacting Greg Bishop, but I'm kind of nervous.
Do it.
Have you ever talked to Mark about his crop circle days? Like all that? Cause there's a lot of conspiracy, there's a lot of, I don't know, that's an interesting story. That's a whole nother can of worms. It's the whole crop circle, MI6.
I've been very interested in the crop circle stuff. I've talked to him about it quite a bit.
Greg Bishop's pretty chill. I saw him at Contact in the Desert 2 years ago, and we kicked it for a fair amount of time. He's a very nice guy.
That's so great. Cool. Thomas. Hey guys, my co-host wants to speak. Thomas, man, don't you hesitate to hit that mute button, alright? You're the co-host, man.
Yeah.
Also, it's an honor to be speaking with you, Thomas. This is great.
Moore tried to represent himself as playing, the intelligence people, but I think my personal opinion is that they played him more than he played them.
Feed into his ego. That's how they do it.
Yeah, and I think, when intelligence agencies recruit somebody, they look at their psychology and what angle would work the best. Is it money? Is it ideology? I think in Moore's case, it was ego.
That's one thing that's greatly, I don't know, I feel like it's really kind of overlooked in the community. It's like, money is not really the currency. In the community, I feel like it's people's time and ego. Wait, am I rugging or am I talking over Thomas right now?
My screen is not responding.
I was just going to say.
Oh, Thomas, you have a hot mic?
Yeah, and my screen's not responding.
Yeah, if Tom's talking, I can't hear him either.
I'm going to go out and then I'll return.
Okay, yeah, so what the hell was I talking about? I forgot.
The currency, money, ego, time.
Yeah, the currency is like people's time, I feel like it's more like the ego, like the ability to influence people and, to kind of, to be believed and to have control over, to have that authoritarian control over what people put their hopes in, right? Because that's really what ufology is. It's like, when it comes down to it, we're all hopeful about finding information, about, finding meaning, right? Is what we're hopeful for. And if you can control that hope, you're controlling.
Yeah.
All right, Thomas, you back in? Thomas, you might want to.
Well, Grider, real quick, while Thomas is figuring that out. I mean, yeah, that's true. But I gotta say, at some level, I have to believe that Bill Moore believed he was doing the right thing. Whether, it was selfish and, hurt people along the way and hurt the field along the way. Yes, absolutely. But I do truly think that he really was trying to get to the bottom of this and thought that this was the best avenue. In fact, he probably thought that he was special and that he can't believe that's such a great, like his own
So did
words, he got to
Hitler.
see it from the inside, like it's really hard to pass up. And, it sucks, in retrospect, you know what I mean? But like, who's to say that any one of us, would be immune to something like that? I mean, obviously now we have history to look back at and make sure that like, hey, this, like maybe this wouldn't happen because we know better, but put ourselves in that position. Someone from an intelligence agency promises you that they're going to give you the goods. Back then, like, it is a Faustian bargain, but it is something that I think more pursued for the truth in the end of it, no matter how shitty it was.
Maybe. I think we're going to hear a lot of the Lou crew say that in the future.
All right, next person that mentions Lou crew is getting kicked from the space, all right?
Why?
This is a Lou crew free zone. You can talk about Lou Elizondo. I just don't want to hear no Lou crew, all right? Bring that in. They're going to have, then it's going to be, it's going to be all types of shit. You're going to hate groups and like memes and, all right?
Well, we see, back to UFO meme faces point, we see
Hold on, wait,
echoes of that.
real quick. Sorry. Hey, Thomas, I keep trying to bring you up, man. Like, I even set the space now to where to where you can come up if I follow you. Okay, maybe Thomas. Okay, Kraft, you can go on and go, and then we'll go to Thomas.
Yeah, I was going to say, we see some echoes of those kinds of promises with Eric Weinstein and Sam Harris, where suddenly they start getting phone calls with people pretending, promising, hey, it's coming, where any day now we're going to show you this crash location, whatever, and promises that never come. Sam Harris was smart enough to get off the boat because he could see right through it immediately. Weinstein, for some reason, still is kind of half a foot inside this world, but you still see echoes of that in some prominent kind of intellectual figures.
It's one of Peter Thiel's boys. Also, I got a boogie, guys, but it's been good talking.
Peace out, BWP is cool here, and you never heard you in space.
Yeah, Bradley.
Yeah, like to come back.
Yeah, man, every Sunday, come through.
Oh, also, I just I visited Michael Sword's one of his research archives a couple days ago and met the professor himself. I'm going to be scanning Ivan T. Sanderson's Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained Files.
Wait. You met Michael? Is he a curmudgeon? Is he like, I heard he's got a reputation for being more of a curmudgeon than Jen Eldridge. If that
Remind me what curmudgeon.
So just like kind of nasty. You know what I mean? Kind of short.
Like grouchy.
He's definitely short, but he was nice to me. He was very courteous and showed me around and showed me everything. And it was like I was lucky enough to meet people like he had me in the archive, and I had met George Eberhardt and Thomas Bullard and Tom Dooley and the Swords.
Oh, that's
so wait, what's your take on it all? PWP? You think there's no non-human anything to any of it?
No, I think there's UFOs. I'm a UFO experiencer myself. I spent 3 years, 2017, 2019, looking at the sky and literally being a crazy person, looking at the sky every single night. Because I saw there's a genuine wave of high strangeness in Michigan, and I saw a lot of weird shit. But that's a whole nother story. But I think there's something real. I don't think that it's aliens is my take, I guess, in the short.
Cool, man. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been nice. I would like to come back.
I'm going to have to sign off. It's midnight here, but Ryder, I want to thank you for your kind words, and I want to thank everyone for the discussion tonight. It's been great. I'm just going to go back to being a listener, but because my app is not responding to commands, so I'm just going to go back to being a listener.
Thomas, like really, man, like you're really truly appreciated, like as a person, dude. Like I cannot stress enough. I'm not articulate enough to come up with some poetic way to say. All I can say is that thank you, and I really mean that. Like I really do. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us, talking about this type of stuff. It's invaluable. It really is.
Thank you.
Yeah, Thomas, I still gotta thank you for those books you shipped out to me like 2 years ago, despite not knowing who I was. And, I'm forever in your debt for doing so.
You're most welcome.
Hey, and Tom, come up with an idea for next week, and we'll each come up with one, and then we'll do a poll, and we'll see what we do. But if you have like a burning idea, like just a perfect idea, please go and let us know, and
you guys should get
next week, man.
Ed Komarick and Mike Jameson in these. They did the 1990s Operation Right to Know protest, and they both knew Bill Moore, and I think even Benowitz during that time and whatnot, like the 80s, 90s. And they're both on Twitter.
We should get, but hey, I tell you what, I'm gonna put a bounty. All right, if you can get Bill Moore to come into this space, I will give you $500. All right, it's a bounty. Now, don't harass Bill Moore, but do not harass. I know this is probably this
is really going to backfire on me, but I don't care. I go through life like this. So, $500 if you can get Bill Moore respectfully. If you have, somebody's got to know him or know somebody that knows him.
Dude,
$500, get him in the space.
the only person that does, I think, still talk to him is Greg Bishop. And that's like every, now and then. Maybe there's like other people, but like we should try and get Greg Bishop in one of these spaces because, he's a wealth of knowledge and he's got a lot of history with this and he knows some of these people that we were talking about personally. And he's also generally a nice guy. Like Red said, like I met him at SCU and he's incredibly nice. You just have to come prepared with facts because he's very straight to the point.
I've been told that Bill Moore has said in no uncertain terms he does not want to discuss UFOs, period.
Yeah, that's what Bishop told me as well. He said something where he's like, well, every time like he asks Bill Moore about something, Bill Moore is just like, well, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time? So it's just interesting.
I'm curious what he would say now to the number 1 and 2 points he says he can conclusively prove or where his conclusions led him to, which is number 1, that extraterrestrial life is here, and number 2, that certain number of government agents know about it but don't know what to do with that information. I wonder where he would stand on both of those today. And I'm surprised that he doesn't even do anything for like Roswell anniversaries, for example, considering his role in that.
Did he not admit in the speech that the Roswell, that it was BS? Or was that the Aztec, is that the Aztec landing?
It was the
right?
Aztec
That's
one.
not Roswell.
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
you know
Aztec.
what? The guy pushed the Philadelphia experiment and that's a proven hoax, so I don't know. I really cannot trust Bill Moore, man. Like I'm still waiting for a good reason to trust him.
Oh man, I did want to ask Thomas, maybe for next time, if Bill Moore ever, after this speech, ever went back retroactively and specified which pieces of information were the ones that he knowingly pushed, knowing that they were false. Did he ever speak to what he knowingly pushed as false, or did he just kind of leave it up in the air?
He said it was all disinformation as far as he was concerned. So he basically, right, that was what he said in the speech. He said, as far as I'm concerned, it's all disinformation. He was referring to the past decade of like the work that he had done, right? Basically is what he said. Maybe I misinterpreted that, but
no, yeah, because if that's what he said, or meant to say, that would include the Roswell stuff.
I'm sorry,
So
what was the question
I don't know
again?
if he's...
Yeah,
did he ever take accountability for anything specifically? Like, what specifically did he disinform?
He said that he did not express any disinformation, that he reported back to AFOSI the effect that the disinformation was having on Benowitz.
Yeah,
he didn't pass on any disinformation?
He even said in the speech that we just listened to, where is it? I wrote it down here. He said, I had nothing to do with the deception and disinfo, although I knew people who were involved. Again, like he didn't disown his work. He stood behind all of it, from Roswell to the MJ-12 documents. He was very quick to, say the community needs to raise their evidence standards, but he didn't challenge any of his own. He didn't, in the years after, he didn't go back and make amends and re-examine his own work. He stood by it,
Okay, yeah, so I got a different take away from that speech. Then my follow-up question would be, did he ever mention which pieces of disinformation he specifically knew were pieces of disinformation to which he reported back to AFOSI about? Because you would think that would be at least a service to the community as, hey, this piece of information, say, I don't know, Project Serpo, that's bullshit. At the very least, being able to tell the community these things stem directly from disinfo campaigns by Doty and company. Did he ever do something like that?
Well, I think the AFOSI people were trying to point Benowitz in the direction of the Archuleta Mesa and the whole underground base thing there and the aliens, taking over the world and all that. That's probably what he was reporting back, because Benowitz had already come to the conclusion that aliens were abducting humans and implanting them and so on and so forth. And I think that AFOSI, possibly Doty, was involved in pointing him toward Archuleta Mesa.
Okay, so was his involvement with Doty and company just specifically relegated to Benowitz?
I think there's a whole lot more to this than we'll ever know about.
Yeah, it started when they sent, what was the name of that letter, Thomas? I can't think of the letter that they sent, to APRO, and then that's how they got in touch with Bill Moore, correct?
Yeah, the Wetzel letter or the Weitzel letter. And it's a very interesting letter, but, the really fantastically true thing is that if you go back to the Robertson panel report, they specifically state that they want to monitor APRO.
Yep, and
here
Hynek went to them, the Lorenzens, and tried to broker some deals with them about like, I'll give you this info if you don't do X, Y, Z, or yeah. So it's always been in the mix, honestly, since like the 40s and 50s. This counterintel budding up stuff.
But there are two channels here, because on the one hand, Moore was claiming that he had a contact who was with a group that wanted to get information out in the public without breaking any laws, and then on the other hand, he was being recruited to inform, not so much as disinform, but inform on Benowitz and on certain UFO groups, namely APRO, maybe MUFON and others, and then certain UFO researchers. He was reporting that information back to AFOSI.
See, I have a problem because Shandera, so Jamie Shandera, his friend, all right, was a virtual unknown in the UFO community. The guy was not in the UFO community. He was just a friend of Bill Moore's, and he's the one that received the first batch of MJ-12 documents with they were inside of an envelope set on his doorstep with no return address, all right? And I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, all right? You know, it was postmarked in Albuquerque, all right? And why did Shandera get sent these? Why did he get sent the film canisters when he wasn't even in the UFO community? He gets sent the greatest batch of documents proving extraterrestrial life in the history of the world, and he gets why?
Well, those are.
I think Bill Moore dropped them
Those
all.
are the two
Cover Up Live?
Yes.
That could be it there.
But those are the two fundamental questions in all of this. Who created the MJ-12 documents and why? And
What'd you say about?
I'm not sure we have answers to either.
Oh wait, so was Shandera?
Shandera was in the UFO Cover Up Live program.
In what capacity?
I think it's still on YouTube. Maybe you should go in and watch it. But he was just one of the people in the program, stating things about UFOs.
Was it? But was it after he had already received the MJ-12 documents? Is that why he was put into the program?
Yeah, it was the UFO Cover Up Live program was in October 1988. Shandera and Moore received the MJ-12 documents, I think, in December of 1984, either November or December of 1984, and then they went public in 1987 when, at the same time, the fellow with his book came out.
Yeah, that makes. I'm telling you, freaking Bill Moore. We all thought it was Doty the whole time. That authored these Well, maybe it was all of them. Maybe it was a cabal of just counterfeit document makers. Doty, on his DD-214, he took a class, a document class, it's document maintenance or something, and how to write. He was, I don't know, maybe it was maybe it was one of those things where maybe Moore and them had created some I don't know, man. It's just really hard to imagine that this all happened, and that, Bill Moore had nothing to do with the creation of those documents. I just really have a hard time.
Doty Document Factory. Love it. Anyway, Grider, it's 1:00 in the morning here, so I gotta step down because I got work tomorrow. Thanks again for doing this. We'll figure something out for next week. Hopefully next week we can start a little bit earlier, so that way Thomas and I can stay on a bit longer. But I'm really glad. I'm really happy the people that showed up, that they did, and the conversations that we've had. They were pretty good.
Yeah. I'm gonna go and close down the space because you guys are about to leave. I'm not gonna. This is a team thing. One come all. I don't know the saying, but you know what it is. It's all for one for all, something like that. I don't know. The point is we're going to do one quick round of closing thoughts, and then I'm going to end the space. And we're going to start next week. I think you guys said at 8 p.m. Central, so we can even do it earlier. Maybe do 7. But we'll have the answer to you guys up by probably Wednesday, and we'll have out where you're going to vote on what you guys have any burning last thoughts. I'll give you guys the final word. And then I'm going to close the space. Done?
I have any close thoughts, except go read Estimate of the Situation if you like history, if you like this kind of talk. That's about it.
All right.
Wait.
All right. Yeah.
Wait. I think after last night's space, I'm no longer allowed. I'm no longer allowed to do closing thoughts.
Does not get the last. Dude, you don't get closing thoughts,
That's what
right?
That's what I was saying.
After last night, oh my gosh. Oh, guys, also, can we have a moment of silence? All right, for Big Tony, Artisan Tony, our community mountain man. He got stood up by Big Homie. And we just have just a moment of silence, just 2 seconds. All right,
bro. I've had so many moment of silences for that.
Come on, dude. Come on, dude. You can't even get 2 seconds for Big Tony. Oh my, dude, mean face. Dude, you're disrespecting. Anyways, guys, you guys thought that Bill Moore, that this was a tragedy for ufology. Just wait for the fallout from the Big Homie standing up Big Tony. This is like, I mean, dude, like I've lost all hope. You know, really, this is the only thing that's keeping me going is this group right here. Mean Face. Okay, besides an advertise. Okay, Mr. Long, do you have a closing thought? Can you do like a minute closing thought? If not, I'm going
Yeah,
to
no, a great
close
space,
the
great
space.
time. Thanks for hosting it. If anybody wants to, read more, learn more about the UFO Cover Up Live, BWP, Be Pleasies, added a whole link. It's a bunch of articles written by Robert Scavarla, I believe is how you say his last name. But he did like a 9-part series on the UFO Cover Up Live last year, and it's a really good read. It's up there in the nest.
One thing I've been thinking about doing is creating a X community, that's like the UFO research group. In fact, I'm going to do it right after. Maybe this would be a good spot. I don't know. Maybe, create a subreddit. Maybe I don't know if you guys go on Reddit. I don't know. We'll figure something out, but yeah, we need to keep this like steam going, this momentum, because we have something special here, I think. And it's a lot of fun to be a part of it. So, next week for any of the listeners, like, please come up and speak. Like we, I mean, clearly we're all passionate about this and this is great. This is awesome. So, everybody have a good night.
Wait, I want my
have a good week and we'll see you.
I was going to say.
All right. We get 45 seconds.
10
Panda,
seconds.
say anything that doesn't involve
Today's
Luke Crew.
drama is tomorrow's history.
I like it. I love it. All right, guys. Take